You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
I don't care if this picture's shot in black and white or sepia tone, or we have to make the whole damn thing in animation. Pete and I are going to Africa. There are times in this life when you can't wonder whether it's the right or the wrong thing to do. Not for guys like you and me, kid. You just gotta pack up and go.
John Wilson, a brilliant, don't-give-a-damn type filmmaker who continually violated all the unwritten laws of the motion picture business.
Me and you got a lot in common, Philip. Both of us is handsome devils. We both like RC Cola. And neither one of us got old man worth a damn.
8-year-old Philip Perry has just been taken hostage.
Are you gonna shoot me?
Oh, yeah.
By the most dangerous man in West Texas.
Put the gun down, old timer. Couldn't hit me anyway. Probably shoot the boy. Get in the car, Philip.
This could be his lucky day.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we are going French heist procedural mode, so join that sleaze, baby.
That's right. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we are in our 7th year of. There's like it might even be like 180 bonus episodes at this point, as well as 50 plus of our bonus transmission series where we talk about new release genre films. And we are in the January Trash 2025 season. I'm very excited to start doing those at some point here. So if you haven't made the jump yet, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we had a bunch of people to give their shout outs today. We had Ishmael Hamadi, Sam Goldberger, Renor Lapastica, Gomez Adams, Chapter House, Mike Moody Garcia, Jeff Rasmussen, Mark Eagleton, Padraig Black, Cameron Dagg, Jake Burgess, Theo Xenophontos. Wow, that's a sick name, actually. JK, Adrian, Nick Richards, and McDude Guy. So thanks to all of you folks for signing up. Hope you're enjoying all of those bonus episodes. We appreciate the support.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you're listening on either one of those platforms, and I can see the stats, I can see you right now listening on both those platforms, give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And the last plug, as always, is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything that you folks can think of. And you freaks have thought of a lot of stuff. You have bought notebooks, you have bought hoodies, you have bought pillows, coffee mugs. If you're interested in any of that, the link is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over here on the main feed would have heard from us. The first episode of 2025, which, as always, is Jamie and I putting the previous year to bed. We talked about our top 15 genre movies of 2024, as well as 2.5 hours of honorable mentions, making that another 5-hour-long episode where Jamie and I just shout titles in each other's direction, and you guys hopefully have watch lists out.
Yes, the amount of 3-star classics that we give you guys is pretty incredible, so get ready.
I have to credit Jamie mostly on that. He goes further into the trenches than I do. This year I got a little bit lazier with it. I was like, Jamie's got me. It's fine.
Oh, yeah, I do. The last 3 months of every year, it's just me digging deep, and it's a lot of fun.
So if you haven't heard that episode again 2 weeks ago over on the main feed, go back and check it out. It's just 5 hours of talking all of our favorite genre movies that came out last year. And then last week over on the Patreon feed, we wanted to once again go back and talk about a classic that is back in the news due to a remake that came out recently. We wanted to talk about the original Universal monster, the Wolfman, Mr. Lon Chaney Jr., once again talking Jack Pierce's iconic makeup artistry and talking all of the very moody gothic horror vibes of that. And then we kind of went, well, what would most people do if they were going to be doing a Wolfman episode? And probably it was like, they're going to do like Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, where Lon Chaney Jr. made a reappearance or something. And we were like, no, we got to do something very Sleazoids core. So we paired that with Wolf Guy from 1975, a Japanese exploitation movie where Sonny Chiba plays a werewolf private detective who finds himself in one of the most ludicrous plots I think we've ever tried to describe on this show to people. Yeah.
Tried our absolute best. That thing is insane. It felt like a movie that we kind of built this show for, where it is just really well-directed nonsense. It has a bunch of elements from a bunch of different genres all slapped together. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it was like 70s funk and martial arts and like pinky violence and like crazy tiger spirits like slashing people open and like a whole government conspiracy, like science fiction horror component. And Sonny Chiba never actually turns into a werewolf because they didn't have the budget to do it. So
no, he just kind of has powers that are related to a wolf, like speed and I don't know, strength, I guess. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah. So if you haven't heard that episode, that was last week over on the Patreon. Go get Wolf Mode with us. But moving on to this week, we are once again joined by a very special guest, someone who's been on this show at least once a year, every year since we started the show, and we're going to keep it going with that. We are joined by Mr. Eddie Averill from the Extended Clip Podcast. Eddie, welcome back, buddy.
Oh, I'm so glad to be back. And making my entrance, I just want to say that the director of Wolf Guy, the same year as Wolf Guy, Kazuhiko Yamaguchi, that is, the same year directed the great Pink film, A Haunted Turkish Bathhouse. And
yes.
I think the Sleazoids out there who haven't seen A Haunted Turkish Bathhouse, if you know your Pinky stuff, you know exactly what that film's going to be like. It is spooky and a lot of nudity and about 80 minutes. Watch it.
I'm watch listing right now.
I have that blind bought Blu-ray sitting on my shelf somewhere that I have not.
Of course you do.
I knew it was going to be done on the show, and I was like, those special features
awesome.
are going to come in handy. So, you know,
that's so awesome. The deep dive into that film. That's going to be great. Can't wait. Stay tuned.
What a title too. I'm very excited. But yeah, Eddie, welcome back. It's been a little while since we had you. It's last time we were talking Roadhouse and Walking Tall, and I think before that we had went Western mode. We went classics. We were talking John Ford and Sergio Leone. But what have you got with us for your 2025 episode?
Well, you know, it's funny that you bring up the episode before last when we talked about a couple Westerns, because at that point in time, I was not doing a podcast. That was during the infamous, drought, the hiatus of Extended Clip. And now I'm bringing a couple films that, and let me backtrack here, going on Sleazoids during that period is what kind of brought me out of the shed, as it were, proving that old dogs can learn new tricks and that I'm not, in fact, too old for this shit. So this time around, because of what you guys did for me, I wanted to bring a couple of Clint Eastwood films to the podcast from his total golden era of the 1990s. This is when he basically started his now 30-year plus run of making films that I would say would be the best final film that you could possibly ask for from a longtime director, but he just kind of keeps making them. So the two, kind of one of them being a quasi-suburban Western, and the other one being a historical film about the classical Hollywood era. The two that I brought this time around are White Hunter, Black Heart, and A Perfect World.
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about these because we have spent most of our time with Clint Eastwood directing in kind of like his 70s period. We have not moved on to his 90s yet. We have not even talked about Unforgiven yet on this show. But this, for a lot of people who are initiated in the films of Clint Eastwood, is like considered kind of the peak period, or at least around the time that his directorial craft and the personal stamp that he was putting on, as well as his formal sturdiness that he had developed by that point, really matched with material, and obviously a point in his life where he was incredibly somber and reflective and really telling stories about that took into account the passage of time and his place as an elder statesman in the industry by 1990, which makes it all the more absurd that he's still going. And we just talked about a movie of his that came out last year because he has been doing it for an incredibly long time. But no, this is an incredible creative period for him. It's definitely considered one of his strongest. And yeah, I'm very excited to talk about both these.
Well, I think one of the reasons that it's such a great period, him in the 90s, is because of the mix of old and new and the interaction of classic Hollywood, the era that birthed him as an actor, and the kind of new Hollywood stuff that, you know, that's when he came up as a director. But now we're like 20 years removed from new Hollywood and all that. So he's able to look back at such a long period of time, both in terms of like what's been going on in America, what's been going on as far as like film style is concerned and the evolution of American film style and, you know, the industry itself, as well as just his own life and his star image. And that is why these two films are such a great pair. They're both kind of time machine films, if you will, with A Perfect World quite literalizing that and being a mid-century period piece, and White Hunter Black Heart, of course, seeing him assume the shoes of one of the great classic Hollywood auteurs in retelling a tell-all Hollywood story.
Hell yeah. Well, that being said, I think we should jump right into it here, and we should start off with that tell-all. We'll go chronological order with these two, I think. We'll talk about the movie that really kicked off this this phase of his career here, White Hunter Black Heart.
John, give it up. Something terrible is wrong. The man has the fever. It's just like any passion. It's irresponsible and it's destructive.
This is simply paradise here. In fact, I'm seriously thinking of staying here forever.
Clint Eastwood, White Hunter, Black Heart.
All right, we are talking White Hunter Black Heart, the 1990 quasi-biographical historical drama with a little bit of like a weird adventure western component to it, directed by Clint Eastwood, written by a pretty intriguing combination of James Bridges, Burt Kennedy, and Peter Viertel, whose book from 1953 was being adapted about his experiences on the set of John Huston's 1951 adaptation of The African Queen, and starring Clint Eastwood as the very brash and egotistical and wild director John Wilson. Not John Huston, John Wilson. And obviously
the guy from How To with John Wilson.
That's the same, the very same. Everyone was like, wow, Clint, he had a lot of thoughts about this guy. And yeah, we'll get into the details of exactly how this story came to be. But the director in this case, Mr. John Wilson, he's a little bit less interested in shooting his movie on location in Africa than he is in shooting a great big elephant, is the sort of intriguing log line of the film. But this is at least, I think our 10th or maybe even 11th time talking about Mr. Actor and Director Clint Eastwood. We've covered everything from his breakout sort of spaghetti western Man with No Name era to which is obviously where they developed the very economical and mysterious kind of tough guy star persona that he would then be wrestling with for the rest of his career, or at least subverting or doing variations on, to his iconic run in the 70s, to, you know, with one of like the all-time great sort of blunt force American genre movie directors like Don Siegel with things like Dirty Harry, and concluded with Escape from Alcatraz. And we've also covered his transition to directing, where he had spent sort of enough time tinkering around on sets and observing directors like Sergio Leone and Don Siegel, two masters, that he really did gather an understanding on how to get his shots and how to control his own image, and, you know, how to direct actors and all of this. And but so far, as I was saying, we've mostly stuck around in his 70 era. We've done like Play Misty for Me, High Plains Drifter, Eiger Sanction, Josie Wales, and basically like when he was first exploring, you know, what kind of director he wanted to be, where he was still willing to do commercial thrillers. And he was like, yeah, maybe I'll do my action spy movie, or, you know, maybe am I going to keep pursuing the Western and American history and myth making and all of this. And what we've largely avoided up until now is his most pretty artistically astonishing and openly personal era, the 1990s, which, with I think the exception of The Rookie, which is a movie he only agreed to do to bankroll White Hunter Black Heart, apparently I read, is arguably his greatest run as a filmmaker. It was the one where his technical elegance and economy behind the camera really did just perfectly sync up with this aged, bittersweet kind of weariness that he started accessing, and that very grizzled and depressed, as Eddie was saying, the I'm too old for this shit kind of register, which, you know, again, he's somehow been doing for 30 years since. And I think is what's kind of most important is that his ambitions as a storyteller really did just grow beyond commercial sensibility, which is not to say that he didn't, you know, have those sensibilities before making commercial movies. It was just always something that was on the back of his mind when he was making movies. He was a star. He was a guy who brought, mouths into the theater to get that popcorn. He would make and this is when it really did feel like he was like, I'm going to make a movie that very well could bomb because I want to make it, instead of being like, I'm going to do Firefox or I'm going to do like another Dirty Harry sequel. Cause I think the Deadpool was like 1988, like shortly before this. And obviously part of this run includes Unforgiven, which is it's insane that we haven't talked about it yet, but we will at a certain point go back and talk about his really first big Oscar win for directing and picture. It was actually a big deal that he won for those and not for acting. And also the other big one is Eddie Bridges of Madison County. Am I missing it?
That would be like the biggest one of the 90s for him outside of Unforgiven. And in certain circles, that would be the most popular one, you know?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, well, that's him literally adapting like a pop romance, like a bestseller, but just doing so in again, like that I watched that movie, I think, for the first time like a year or two ago with my fiance, and like we like both were like crying at the end of that movie. We were like Clint. I didn't know Clint had this kind of movie in him, and Meryl Streep is so good in that movie. That's like a rare movie that somehow manages to pull like cosmic weight out of like what seems like kind of just a regular paperback romance novel. And, you know, I was pretty blown away by it. Unforgiven, we don't need to say anything else. Everyone knows how incredible that is. But I am excited to be addressing the movies made during this period, that especially these that really don't seem to get the same kind of attention that those two movies do, and arguably are you know, just as worthy of it. The first of which here obviously is White Hunter Black Heart, adaptation of Hollywood screenwriter Peter Vertel's part autobiographical, part maybe thinly fictionalized account of John Huston's making of The African Queen from 1951, starring Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn, which I guess Pete was the consulting uncredited polisher of the script, for which he apparently frequently did for Huston, but also Billy Wilder did it for Hitchcock a couple times. And he was asked to tag along onto this location shoot in Africa, which resulted in all kinds of production issues, including dealing with animals and dealing with sickness. But chief among them, in terms of the kind of unflattering myth of what went down, with Huston, is he became apparently so obsessed with big game hunting, he neglected the movie almost entirely and was genuinely more interested in shooting elephants than, shooting film. And, Pete kind of writes it like he's like the Hollywood director version of like Moby Dick or something. He's going nuts.
Kind of descent into madness kind of thing. Do we have any logs or anything that explains that specific obsession? Like, is there, I don't know, any documents.
I tried to
of any
look this
kind?
up, and I'd really just need to go read the book, I guess, or something, or just find more. Like I tried to find out like if there was anyone who had like interviewed him and said, you know, what parts are you exaggerating and what parts are you not, and there was really very little to find about it.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So,
yeah, because I was just curious, because I mean, either way, you can still make it very much work as a just through metaphor, obviously, but it would be incredibly interesting to find out what went down in that set.
Yeah, I mean,
John Huston was absolutely like the legend that they portray him as in this. You know, if you guys have seen the Orson Welles, you know, unfinished movie, The Other Side of the Wind, his character in that is just him. Like, he's just kind of a ball breaker who is much more in tune with, like, you know, at one point in this movie, he compares his style of storytelling to Flaubert and Melville. And I guess, you know, he's someone who wanted to be more like that, wanted to be like the barroom brawling author, like Ernest Hemingway or something like that, more than just a Hollywood picture maker. And so his flights of fancy on set were, you know, perhaps exaggerated in the story, but very believable from everything I've ever read about him.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Pauline Kael called the book one of the best, like, behind-the-scenes tell-all books ever written, despite the fact that I think Peter seemed to be a little bit like, I kind of wish I changed the names a little bit more, because that was how as a result of her saying that was how everyone engaged with the book. And he thought that there was, like, you know, he's like, obviously the ending is something I kind of came up with, and I showed it to him and he really liked it, actually. And he was like, yeah, go with it, you know? So, you know, there's some of this is definitely like, it was his, someone's account of being in the orbit of that and how it felt to kind of be in the orbit of that. That's been kind of translated by a few different names here, because it's obviously there's Pete's book, but then also you have a couple different writers here that are very interesting, because you have Burt Kennedy, who's attached here, who was Bud Bedeker's regular screenwriter, who eventually became a Western director himself in the 1950s. And then you have 70s and 80s sort of like new Hollywood dramatist. You have James Bridges, who had written The China Syndrome and Urban Cowboy and Mike's Murder, which we've covered. So you have a classical Hollywood B-Western writer taking a crack at this. That's as early as they wanted to adapt it. Like, it almost got made in the late 50s. Then you have the 70s and 80s going by, where you get a little bit more of a sort of complex romance character psychology guy taking a look at it. And then somehow, some way, it landed on Clint Eastwood's desk, and he got involved in the process here. And I don't know, like, exactly what happened there, but I do know that he was in this weird position around this time where he had just finished one of the strangest Dirty Harry sequels, The Deadpool. His Secret Affair Children had just went public. And I get the feeling that he was looking for, like, material he could, like, really sink his teeth into. And obviously that would involve a little bit of location shooting. And I can definitely see what attracted him to the kind of rich psychological power dynamic and, like, the metafictional story here, because as Eddie was mentioning, obviously he has a certain respect for the old Hollywood guys, and for he's someone who is aware of both the mythical aspect of old Hollywood, but also of, like, the cowboy. And there's something so interesting about, kind of the symbolic observation of Peter's book, which is, here is, like, the film director as, like, a cowboy gone mad with power, kind of deal. Yeah. And, his sort of primal instincts coming out, and it becoming this kind of macho pissing contest between the two of them. And obviously, eventually, he ends up kind of humbled by that entire experience. And it is also meant to be a little bit critical of Huston. But, I can see where Eastwood, having kind of been around the block as both a director and a cowboy, was kind of like, I can see my way into this character. I know some of the things that he's feeling, and he kind of empathizes with him, I think, a little bit more than I would have expected, considering some of the bizarre and insane behavior on display by John Huston, or John Wilson, in this movie.
Yeah, I mean,
it's funny. Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, Clint Eastwood has been just on an absolute run for decades now, so I can imagine that he could really lock into the wrestling of ego mixed with talent. The John Wilson character is constantly talking about how you almost have to separate yourself from any audience expectation and really just listen to your own instincts and impulses. It makes sense that Clint Eastwood would probably also have some kind of a fear of that within himself, of going too far at a certain point. I think it's really interesting to also capture such a prolific director and kind of capture his attitude and philosophy, but through, I guess, half truth and half myth. That is fascinating, and I do think that makes it a little bit more just interesting, as if you want to call this kind of a biopic. I think it's just it captures like what he is as an artist more than just, here's his life from beginning to end kind of thing. So
and what it felt like to be a bystander on his set rather than necessarily like in his skin,
Yeah, that's true. The majority of this is people like anyone that isn't Clint Eastwood is kind of just waiting around and going, what the fuck are you doing, man? You're ruining not just this production, but our lives, these villagers' lives. Like it's everything.
But also there's a godlike ox. Like, this is the guy who made the Maltese Falcon. Right. Everyone wants to make a movie with this guy. Like,
yep. So, and then he also is using that with the complications of his character because he knows he can get away with it because of his immense talent and reputation. That's the only way that he can get the funding to go to Africa and start trying to hunt this giant elephant. So, yeah, there's a lot here to balance for a director as well as someone who is performing that part. It's crazy that he's balancing both of these things. Clint Eastwood, I mean.
And I think the names are something to like make note of because, Josh, you were saying that like, oh, maybe you should have changed the names a little more obviously. But I find that contributes to like the demystification of Hollywood stars at the time. Like Humphrey Bogart, his name in this one is Phil Duncan, which is like the most not Humphrey Bogart name of all time. And the guy looks exactly like Humphrey Bogart too. He played him multiple times in different low budget projects and like biopics and recreation docs and whatnot. But I like that the Humphrey Bogart character is just kind of like off to the side the whole time. You have one little aside where him and the Lauren Bacall character like kiss for a bunch of reporters, but other than that, like, he's just a guy who has to sit in a chair smoking cigarettes waiting for his director. This is not about like the glamour of Hollywood stars, it's about the madness of Hollywood directors.
And really what you see a lot of the time is we have the director John Wilson or Clint Eastwood ignoring everybody, trying to do the hunting game like I said, but then everyone else is actually doing the work, especially the locals. Like there's that one shot where they're pulling the boat from out of the water, and it's just obviously incredibly heavy. And then you just have John Wilson with his hands on his hips, smoking a cigar and just like shouting orders with a smile on his face. And you see that time and time again. It's almost it's kind of on purposely repetitive in that way, so that you can kind of sink into the thought that nothing is happening. And they're wasting so much time and resources and energy.
Yeah, well, and I think Dave Kerr wrote about the movie, and he was saying that like he felt that it was a really interesting. The term he used to describe it was autobiographical fantasy, and I think the reason he called it that was partially to deal with possibly opening up the fact that some of this is exaggerated or made up in some capacity, but in another capacity being like it's clear that Eastwood is also trying on a different identity, because he's like, here he has an opportunity to depict a filmmaker who was very historically and documentedly very kind of impulsive and could be extravagant and could be brash and all of the things that Eastwood kind of isn't. He was known as being like the more sobering guy on a set, the guy who just we're clocking in, everyone's getting it done, everyone leaves for the day. He was a guy who was budget minded. He was someone who thought about all of these things as a producer. He eventually became a producer in order to have more control over his movie, so that while directors couldn't do these kinds of things to his sets, that he was, and that he could more easily manage these things. So in some ways, he's kind of getting this out of his system, or at least trying it on. He's trying on a hat in the year 1990. And what I find so interesting about that is the result is, for anyone who hasn't seen it, I think genuinely one of the most eccentric and liberated Clint performances I've ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
Because his take on Huston is completely neurotic and complicated. He plays him as someone who is intelligent, and at least formerly someone who was, a really honorable kind of artist, or at least someone who still holds some progressive values, but someone who clearly that with time and with age has just gotten more bitter and gotten more drunk, and is obviously in the early stages of emphysema, which John Huston obviously had, and which we're recording this just after David Lynch passing away. So it was kind of on my mind after watching this too, that both of those directors suffered from that. They were guys who just loved to smoke, and Clint does a lot of smoking in this movie, but also just the way that Clint gets to be so chatty. He gets to speak his vulgar mind. He gets to indulge every macho urge and instinct that this Huston wanted to have, or this image he wanted to have of himself, and gets to experience it by just really being flagrant with the power of a bankrolled filmmaker. And it does feel like Eastwood being like, this is the opposite of anything I've ever wanted to do on a set, and he's having so much fun just being like, how brash and pretentious, and how much can I get my mannerisms, the drawl he sometimes pulls while he starts doing these sermonizing monologues that he gets. And Eastwood, I don't think I've seen him have more fun.
Yeah, even the way that he's introduced with the newspaper, the guy Peter, he gets this he goes up the long driveway where there's this huge mansion that they're going to be staying at, and they go up the stairs. You just see all of the interior and just how expensive everything is, and then you go into this room that honestly looks like it's out of a completely different century, and he's even wearing clothes that are kind of more old-fashioned when he's revealed, but they reveal him in this almost gag-like way where he slowly puts down the newspaper that he's reading and gives him a little smirk and a smile, and he's very playful, honestly. And you almost think because of that you kind of put your guard down a little bit with this character at first, because they're happy to see each other, they are being playful. But then as this film goes, it does still show his kind of it has that classic masculinity where he does triumph over somebody that deserves it. But then there's so many moments where his character doesn't even realize that he's being, equally racist, for instance, to compared to someone that he has talked down to, so that's
the Eastwood touch.
absolutely. But
I was how many times in this man's career did he find a way to progressively say bad words?
Yeah, exactly. For real, he's the best at it. Oh yeah.
The montage that ends with him thanking the Dykes on Bikes group in The Mule, begins way back. It goes all the way back to the beginning.
Goes all the way back. And it's fun to see him too with Jeff Fahey too, who is a guy I completely only associate with the movies of Robert Rodriguez. Very fun to watch him and Clint Eastwood, and Jeff in such a boyish and kind of clean cut era, and Eastwood looking like he looks like he's prepped for a day of shooting on Barry Lyndon or something. Yes. It's very bizarre.
And I do like that it established this. You almost have a little bit of, I don't know if trust is the word, but it's it's at first kind of fun to hang out with them, at least in this very first scene. And then you see that rhetoric being used that he has, and that skill for charisma that he has to excuse his behavior later on as it goes. And he's just full of contradictions as a character. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Eastwood's performance, he's battling against his own persona here while embracing the manly persona of Huston, as well as his kind of erudite sense of humor. Huston, as I said, is invoking the great modernist literary figures, and even before that, of course. The combination of that and the kind of stilted 40s dialogue and what we know Clint's sense of humor to generally be, mixed with the version of Clint ball busting in this, it's a very back and forth, battling, self-battling performance. But I feel like it, what Josh said, calling it liberated, is perfect, because he just breaks out of his shell, and it just becomes such a fun performance.
Yeah.
I read a great quote from him where he was basically he even admitted, he's I might have gone a little too far with it, with the performance, but he mentioned, and he was basically look, he's I thought the worst version of this movie was me being too careful and respectful. And so that was how he argued was the decision that he made. And I actually, reading some contemporary reviews, there was some very funny arguments I saw being made that some people kind of read it as Eastwood was getting his chance to own a liberal Hollywood legend in a way. I don't know if that instinct is like, I don't know if that's like completely untrue, but on some level, it's impossible to argue that Clint also isn't. And I think Jonathan Rosenbaum had a really excellent piece, if anyone who looks it up, about, you know, that he really does feel that there's a lot of self-implication happening in this depiction as well. And it's not just because he shared similar tics and behaviors and all of that. Again, that feels kind of new to him. But I do think Clint on some level kind of understands the effort to cultivate this kind of macho myth persona and this image, and something that, you know, you're trying and failing to kind of live up to it in some way. And he felt really bad for, you know, the experience that John Huston has, which we'll talk about when we get to the end of the film. But prior to that, yes, it is a lot of, you know, it's almost like here's the witness character who's taking notes on a legendary account and is just like, man, this guy is the most like fuck you, screw you all, violent motherfucker who's ever lived in Hollywood. And
yeah, he also still paints him, though, especially in the first half, that he gets the job done and he gets to do what he wants, but that he's kind of painted as correct in a way.
Yeah.
And then it almost turns in that second half as like, actually, no, he is, they were probably right to give him a couple blockades and slow him down a little bit. But I do love the commitment of the performance, and like committed to a fault. And that there's a part of his character that he even says it in a line somewhere where he's like, he's not forcing anyone else to do this with him. It's really just for himself, even though it's all attached to other people. But he's kind of...
Well, yeah, and I was going to say, even though there's a lot of people's careers and art and all this kind of stuff on the line, which is, I think, where Pete kind of has the most upset with him he gets. Because in the early parts, you can actually feel him being charmed, I think, by Clint, because he's very much just being like, yeah, I can kind of see what it is that he's doing, but look, you wanted an eccentric genius, and you have to have both of those things. Like, this comes with what you want. Like, so many of the characters when he first shows up at the property are like, man, he's worse than ever. You know, he is like so self-destructive. He's so insane. He's so difficult to even just hold a conversation with. And he's just going, that's just John, man. What do you mean? This is the genius director. You've hired this guy for a reason. You know exactly what you're going to get out of this guy. And the early goings really are like him just helping him rewrite his latest motion picture, again in the slight renaming, The African Trader, which he wants to shoot on location in Africa so that the movie studio will pay for his big game hunting safari vacation that he wants to take Pete on. And the way that it shows this is it goes from Eastwood like kind of blustering and being an abrasive asshole in meetings with like his producer Paul Landers, played by George Zenza, and, you know, sweaty and just desperate to serve the movie, basically that character is. And he's basically arguing, he's like, look, I won't shoot a frame of this film outside of Africa, but he's arguing it for like artistic credibility reasons. And in like the following scene, in his like newspaper boy hat, he's like buying rifles and ammunition and charging it to the production company account. Like, it has nothing to do with the artistic credibility of the script or anything like that. Like, he really just is, this is my gateway to go on an African safari vacation.
He even mentions,
I love how much of this movie is, go ahead.
Oh, he even mentions owing like $300,000 and having nothing left to lose. One of my favorite lines, and it just dives right into his head and where his philosophy is that he says he's like, he'll think of his creditors as he's being eaten by whatever like beast that he's trying to kill. He's just like, I don't care. Yeah. I'm literally going to Africa to either die or kill an elephant. I don't give a shit what happens.
The way he envisions his death is so amazing. Talk about how he'll think about his creditors laughing after, you know, he's dead and gone in some Hollywood flop house, and they name an award after him and give it to all the wrong people.
Just that's like one of the best monologues he gets, man.
Yeah.
It is the funniest like monologue in the movie, outside of the one we'll get to that has to do with a certain World War II figure and a drawing. Yeah. But I also just love how much of this movie consists of George Zunza, who, by the way, just I mean, I'm sure everyone listening to Sleazoids knows, character actor god George Zunza, just like flop sweating, being so upset at how much of an asshole Eastwood is about this production, being the guy who has has to foot the bill for it. It's such a great performance and really not something I'm used to seeing Zunza doing. You know, usually when he's like the big, bulge, sweaty guy, it's because he's like a sleaze bag, but I like, or just like a shitty cop or something. But I like him being like the producer doing the super exaggerated 40s New York Jewish voice, kind of like Eastern European mixed with Hollywood Jewish voice almost. And it's just such a fun performance from Zunza.
Yeah, I like all of the scenes of him just like Eastwood just shredding Zunza over whatever sort of production details they're dealing with. Clearly not interested in having any of those discussions anyway, because he doesn't really care about the movie. Though they do sit down and have one argument early on that I really like, which is when they talk about the artistic merits of the downbeat ending of his script, which is between him and Pete, where, you know, Pete is kind of arguing that, like, you know, after putting the characters through the ringer where you've had them fight a river in a tropical storm and the Germans, he's like, you just like blow the ship up and like kill everybody, like that's so bleak and cynical. And he says it's inspired by an old saying that God makes a man before he kills him, and that writers and directors are not in show business. We're lousy little gods who control the lives of people we create, and we decide if they live or die. And Pete just goes, that is like such a misanthropic perspective and view of the characters that you're writing. And also he's having a conversation that I think Eastwood has probably had amongst some people he's talked to before. It's like, it's unfair to a paying audience of like a ticket buyer and like a popcorn buyer. And he's just like, I don't care. He's like, there's two ways to live in this world. You crawl and you kiss ass and you write their happy endings and you sign their contracts, or you live wildly and you let the chips fall where they may, and you tell off the guy who can cut your throat, and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And that leads into his big monologue about, he's like, you know, I'll have contributed 5 to 10 damn good pictures in my life. That's all I need. I'll die in a flop house. They'll name an Academy Award after me, and I'll be in hell laughing about it. And
I also
it's just
I was just going to say, I also think his outlook has to do with the fact that this is after he came back from shooting newsreel footage during World War II. You know, like John Huston was one of the big figures in the Four Came Back book and subsequent documentary. Him, John Ford, Frank Capra, among others, Hollywood directors who went to shoot wartime footage and propaganda, if you will. And I feel like Huston has the most like kind of fuck it attitude for coming back from war. You know, like I feel like Ford becomes a lot more like questioning of American history, and his films become a lot more complicated after World War II. And Frank Capra, you know, you could say, some people make the case that he becomes a lot more conservative after the war or something like that. It feels like John Huston came back, was just like, you know what, life is cheap. Let's just take risks and go crazy and shoot an elephant, you know, because we're only here for so long.
Yeah. Smoke every day.
Yeah, and smoke every day. Yeah, smoke those like cigarillos too. Like he smokes the very thin, long boys.
What I find, there's an interesting kind of moment. At first, it's almost played as a gag, but by the end, it really feels like he's desperate for it. Where he's speaking to that. I think she only has a scene, but he's speaking to that the blonde woman that I think he goes on a date with. The way that she's introduced is really funny because they're looking at weapons before they go off to Africa, and he's pointing the gun at the door, and she walks through, and she's right in the scope and everything. Very foreshadowing of certain things that might happen in Africa. And then she goes on about this story that she has because she also wants to be a writer, and it's like about a lost puppy dog, almost like a Family Channel kind of thing. And it ends with, you know, everyone getting together, and he just calls it swell and kind of brushes it off. But it's like at the end, especially, and we'll get to all the details, but it's like he's almost desperate for something like that near the end of it. And it is interesting in this beginning to hear him brush off all of these little subtle things of people like asking him not to be completely pessimistic, have a little bit of hope.
Yeah. Well, and with that, he's also just interested in taking that woman to bed and listening to her story.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he has the one. There's a kind of a funny line where he's like, obviously very Clint Eastwood. If there's half as much life in this gal as there is talk, I'm going to be dead in the morning. Says something like that to Pete. It's
Mr. Huston liked his drinking and his smoking and his one night stands with beautiful women, which is definitely part of what's being depicted there. And he also liked his little parties. I do like the little dinner party they go to at the start of production, where it's like King Kong night at the club for some reason, and they're watching like this like Marilyn Monroe dressed woman and like this guy in this like Kong suit just start like, you know, doing all the motions to the tribal drumming, which is actually one of the most astonishing transitions in the movie. Like that really close focus on the, you know, the like lifeless Kong suit, and then it moves into like the Indiana Jones like map and plane to Africa and you know, all this kind of stuff when they actually eventually touch down obviously in Uganda. And Pete has come along to start rewriting the script for him, and you know, whether they change the ending or not, he's going to, you know, at least help him polish the script. And John keeps insisting that, you know, all he's doing is overcomplicating his Hemingway and Melville style simplicity, and instead they need to put the script down, they need to go on safari, and once they've shot their elephants, then they can shoot the movie, which Pete is like very confused about, because he's just like, I thought we were that's gonna be our little celebratory rap party, and he's like, no, we're doing this right now. They do get into some interesting sort of colonial history here as well, because obviously the British are already there, like they always are, and the Pete is like conscribed to play like some soccer on like the literally segregated like soccer teams, which we see scored to like some tribal singing and dancing, and you know, some of the way the community is getting along, and some of the more I guess what you would say regressive elements start to crop up in sort of casual ways and casual settings. And I think the best example is the scene that Eddie was alluding to earlier, which is the dinner party that goes quite sour because the woman at the table reveals herself to be just an absolutely raging anti-Semite and basically suggests at the table that Hitler's distaste for Jews was the one thing that he got right. And it turns into this incredible Eastwood monologue, because Pete is, you know, obviously a Jewish screenwriter who came over to Hollywood, and he was someone who you can imagine experienced this when they went there and they had conversations with the few British people they conversed with. And Eastwood just gets this incredible story where he recounts this long story of this beautiful woman he met during his time fighting the Germans out of London, who had said something quite similar to her that they had all overheard. And it resulted in him leaning over and saying, "Madam, I have dined with some of the ugliest goddamn bitches in the world in my time, but you are the ugliest bitch of them all," to which she literally fell off her chair. No soldier raised a hand to help her, and when she reported him to his superiors, they discovered that she was a Nazi agent. And Clint, I tried to clip this monologue because it's so incredible, but it's like 3 or 4 minutes long, so I couldn't even post it, because he relishes in every time he gets to say bitch, every time he gets to really be like, isn't that amazing? And every time he's like, you're a beautiful woman. A beautiful woman doesn't interrupt someone telling a story. And he really takes his time to, you know, lull her into the story for her to go, why did you tell me that story? And she's just like, oh, not because I thought you were a German agent, because I was just now tempted to say the very same thing to you. And, you know, madam, you are, well, you know the rest.
To add and the way that after, like, to not say it after, but like he like says it so often. A spear in her
chest would have been like more subtle than the way that he delivers that monologue.
It's just incredible how many.
The way he chews the scenery while he's drawing too, because the whole time he's drawing a portrait of her, and we see him drawing doodles throughout the movie, but I don't know. I feel like that's such a great like tool of acting by Eastwood here to like have something to do with his hands, but like beyond just having something to do with his hands, the way he's like going from, you know, going through the recesses of his memory to making eye contact with the people at the table to looking down at the portrait that he's making of this girl who he's giving a Hitler mustache to. And it's just some of the best acting Eastwood has ever done, to be honest.
Yeah, it's great. And there's also that kind of complicated half hero, half like he leans into the kind of the misogyny and all that kind of stuff, but only to do it, only to bring her to her comeuppance. It's really brilliant that way. And I like too that he uses these things that he calls her, you know, basically calls her one of the ugliest people he's ever met by the end of it, because of her view of the world and view of Jewish people. But then at the same time, he like feeds into her ego by calling her too beautiful over and over again. when she's trying to interrupt the story, so she can kind of still stay locked in. And all of it is really well written. And again, yeah, like you guys said, well performed. It's just, I love that it still balances.
And also
Clint
just
Eastwood's
throwing around the slurs himself, like he likes to do, like in the follow-up where he gets into a bare knuckle brawl with the British hotel manager, very Barry Lyndon style, once again, speaking of which, who mistreats like an African waiter, which I will say, he describes his sense of honor that he's going to defend the little guy who is obviously being oppressed in just the most vulgar slur heavy way imaginable that we cannot repeat.
No, absolutely not.
Oh no.
But what I do love before that is that he is constant. I was watching it with my family, and we were laughing every single line delivery he has in this scene, just because like when he's going up against the big brute British guy that's calling all of the staff bastards. He's like just calling him like, you're a hairy, rotten, sadistic son of a bitch. You're a yellow bitch and shit like that. Like just saying as many things as he can back to him.
I also love that he gets the shit kicked out of him in that fight, because that's also something that Eastwood, I think by playing who he's playing, he's comfortable depicting him that way. The normal Clint Eastwood hero would never have this situation where he gets into a fight and just absolutely gets rocked in the way that he does. And then Hust has to say that, like, look, just the symbolic nature of standing up to fight felt good and was a good thing, even though everyone just kind of goes, dude, you're gonna just like get yourself killed before you even shot a frame of this movie, and the insurance company is gonna fucking kill us.
Yeah. And again, they still do that balance thing where they give him a little bit of cool points by someone asks him like are you okay, and he's, he gives him almost the classic like, you should see the other guy kind of line. That's not exactly what the line is, but there's always this element of confidence regardless of what he goes through. If he wins or loses, he still kind of wins in the end. That's just how he delivers his character.
Well, yeah, and at a certain point, the producer calls him
saying that he would have won the fight too. He's like, "Oh yeah, I was just getting used to his style.
Right,
In 10 minutes, he would have been dead."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's going pufferfish mode a little bit. He's just like, I'm the biggest boy here, even though the producer absolutely agrees. I love that the one line the producer gets here, that like, of all the animals of Africa, John is like the wildest man here. He's like, oh boy, okay.
I do like, just because this is kind of based on his performance again, and we were talking about the dinner sequences where he's playing to the industry. There is moments where he's kind of playing up like almost British slang, and there's a part where someone even calls him out on. He's like, "Why are you using almost a fake accent right now?" And it's interesting.
It's the producer confronts him. He's like, "Dude, why are you playing games? Like, you're doing this like phony English accent." And I think he even says, "You're playing the role of the Great White Hunter. Why don't you just like become like a movie director again? That's what you are. Yeah, we're here to shoot a movie."
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because the industry has basically both kind of created him in a way, like at least the confidence that he has and the power that he has comes from the industry. But they also need him to be kind of this unhinged talent. But then at the same time, he's clearly performing for them. And that's interesting because you'd think that he'd be so confident and sure of himself that he wouldn't have to do that. But there's still a little part of him that is feeding into whoever he's in front of. He's kind of playing chameleon a little bit. And I just found that to be fascinating with this character specifically because he's so strong-willed throughout the entire film, except in these small pockets.
Well, yeah, and also how much of the film is him, like, because so much of this is there's a certain image that he wants to have of himself, and in some ways he does have it. When like I like the early moments, like when he's confronting these people with Pete watching him, because you can see Pete a little bit awed by like, yeah, that director, look at the way he knew exactly every knife to twist in that woman at that table, and she deserved it. And there's a quality of him being impressed by that. There's a quality of him being impressed about how wild and crazy he'll just get into a fight over a waiter's honor, and there's something impressive to him about that. And then over the course of the movie, he gets disillusioned by that because one, there's the reality of Huston. He is really trying to be someone he really isn't completely, or someone he wants to be. And sometimes you see it in like the nature of how cool and confident he is in the early goings of when they first decide that, they're going to get like that sequence with the helicopter pilot played by Timothy Small, who is flying them out to their safari guide. And there's a part where like they nearly crash the plane and Eastwood is just, he's got his hat on. He's like, yeah, I'm going to, wake me up if something crazy happens. But other than that, whatever. I don't care. We can just roll over and die. It's fine by me. But then once they actually hit the hunt, Pete kind of sees, I think the first moment we see Pete like start to question this is one, he sees the kind of the beauty of the actual elephants themselves and the incredible location shooting that they were doing, where they could actually, he sees something so majestic, and he has this big monologue where he's just like, indestructible, it's all part of the earth. It makes us feel, like these little creatures from another planet, and makes one believe in God, and the experience that he's having. And it's something so big and grand that he's experiencing. And I think the first thing he sees John do is literally aim his rifle and miss every single one of his shots, and then start getting just coughing with sickness. And you're just like, oh man, this guy is like not the crazy, macho cowboy he keeps pretending to be in all of these, situations.
He's
and it's
having
actually
a fight with God right now.
It's hurting this guy. He's being humbled. It reminded me by the end of that movie. I don't know why this is the movie I thought about. Maybe it was just because it was the Africa aspect. But last year we covered the movie Roar from 1982, which was Tippi Hedren and John Marshall and Noel Marshall, all just being like, we can have a nice African reserve with all these tigers. And once they actually meet the tigers and the tigers just start fucking mauling them left and right, you go, no, I think the tigers are in their own league.
Especially 100 of them.
And I felt very similar to like the experience that the John Wilson character goes through here, where it really does feel like the sheer overwhelming power of nature and the limitations of mankind become really, really clear once you get confronted with some of the imagery that they get here. And I think Eastwood does a good job of setting it up and also knocking himself down.
Yeah, I was more reminded of the Adam Sandler film Blended, that sees him take his wife Drew Barrymore to Hollywood, or to Africa rather.
Correct.
The location shooting in this is really great, and it almost feels like kind of flatly shot at times in a way that's almost more journalistic than anything.
Yeah.
And then once in a while, there's just a total money shot where all the characters are in silhouette, or they're being shown through the reflection of a body of water during the golden hour. And it's just like the resisting of the urge to make every shot look overly beautiful, like you probably could at these natural landscape locations, is very smart filmmaking by Eastwood and his DP on this one.
That's true.
Yeah, this was one of Jack and Green shot this, and they had only started working together on Heartbreak Ridge, and then they shot basically everything after that all through the 90s together. But this is like definitely a fantastic example of exactly what people talk about when they talk about Eastwood as like unshowy and kind of economically minded, because every director with these locations would be like, I'm gonna shoot like literally the most beautiful movie anyone's ever seen, and on some level Eastwood is like, no, I'm locked into these characters.
Yeah, it seems almost like every time he does have a beautiful nature shot, it's kind of set up in a context in which man is intruding and about to kill something in that wonderful area. So it's always undermining. Every single time there is a beautiful shot, it does feel like danger is afoot because man is approaching,
Yeah, and Eastwood spends the back half of this movie literally just going fucking Ahab mode. Like literally just becoming more and more obsessed with shooting one specific elephant he calls the biggest tusker in all of Africa, and getting quite dangerous about it too. One of my favorite sequences is the one where the unit director, Ralph, played by Alan Armstrong, joins them to test out the old rickety ship that they plan to use on the shooting of the movie. And he goes, we were going to like do a set or something instead. They said that this thing actually couldn't even be used because it's, it's just, we couldn't shoot it for real. And he goes, yeah, how about we really ride it downriver and I show you that this thing is solid. And he nearly capsizes them and sends them down a fucking like waterfall in order to prove to the, to the unit director that they can use it. And
there's some really great directing in that in general. Just that scene. I love the POV that he puts at the front of the boat, so you can just see how rapid and rough the waters are. Yeah, it's great, and the shots connecting to that, where you have Pete kind of more so freaking out, and John or Clint just having the time of his life. He's actually smiling ear to ear and just like totally on board till he sees the waterfall, of course. But yeah, that's
my favorite detail is he immediately goes, "Oh shit, maybe I almost got us killed."
Yeah, my bad. Let's go back to the village. Yeah,
that's the one moment where like the California boy comes out in him for a second, right? Because there's that great scene too where he keeps calling him the Hollywood hunter. He's like, "Why do you keep using that like insultingly? You think I haven't heard that? I'm from California before." Mm-hmm. And again, it felt like one of those moments where Eastwood's kind of getting something else out of his system. He's just like, in LA we make a product. You could call us a factory town.
Yeah.
That was like Eastwood absolutely said that before.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Which is funny because that just gets into the endless contradictions of Eastwood. Like, that his character from Gran Torino, who was laid off from a factory town in Detroit making cars, would, he would do the Gran Torino scowl at that statement,
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you guys have seen The African Queen, but this boating sequence is definitely the closest, like, one-to-one recreation in this movie from a scene from that movie. And it's a really great way of just like upgrading 50 years later, or I guess 40 years later, how you can shoot action now with the progression of film equipment. And yeah, like what Jamie pointed out, those shots where the camera is mounted toward the front of the boat and having like the very front of the boat be, locked into the frame so that you can really just get motion sickness and see how crazy the current of that river is just so exhilarating. It's some of the best like action shooting of Eastwood's career.
Yeah, it's really great, and that is wild to say because it is incredibly exciting. But it's pretty short lived at the same time too. But it's a very memorable part of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think he is at some point. He's trying to introduce some of the danger of what it is that he's doing, right? Because obviously by the very end of this film, there's some pretty hefty and violent consequences for some of the things that he's doing, and I do think that he wants to kind of allude that those things are possible, and that this guy is kind of living in a Hollywood bubble of being like, I'm literally turning Africa into like my macho fantasy plaything of I get to go there and pretend to be an awesome hunter, and like and it's that quality that really starts to alienate Pete, because when he joins them on the first hunt where they do find the elephant, but he's in like a pack, and because it's in a herd, the guides tell him, they were like, look, if you shoot him, we're gonna get charged at, and there's a really strong chance that like someone's gonna get hurt, and so you can't take that shot. We'll wait for a better shot. We'll come back on a different day. And, that results in him having to spend day after day and week after week doing this, progressively getting more ill, progressively getting more irresponsible and destructive when it comes to neglecting the production and neglecting his obligations and his responsibilities and all of this. And at a certain point, Pete like straight up threatens to leave because he's like, I don't even understand why you want to do this. Like, it's like the elephants are awesome and beautiful. Like, why do you even want? And I can't remember the full monologue, but he gets a great moment where he's just like, he wants to commit a sin. He's like, it's the only sin that you can buy a license and go out and commit. And that's his explanation for it. And he tries to be like, do you understand what I'm saying? And he's just like, how could you? I don't even understand like myself.
That's it. It really does feel like he's acting like God, but then challenging God at the same time. Calling it a sin would be like some higher power is judging you, but at the same time it feels like a battle within himself. So he really is battling like nature, God, the God he thinks that he has within himself because of his giant ego.
The godlike power he wields as a legendary film director, that everyone has to obey him and look up at him, and
he's almost like, I can't quite kill myself, so I'm gonna kill an elephant. That's almost what it feels like in a way. He's like, I'm too big of an ego to do it to myself, so I'll just kill an elephant.
Those lines are like the great example in this film about Eastwood just like embracing the contradictions of his character and of even of his star image, you know? Like, I feel like that's
totally,
this run can be defined by that, by him, you know, it's his too old for this shit period. And so he's embracing all these contradictions, like an old man being an action hero, and the contradictions of his, you know, patriotism versus questioning the systems of America, and his like tenderness versus his hyper masculinity. And so, yeah, I just find that that's like such a great way to embrace all the contradictions of the character here, him being at once a classic Hollywood director, but also like a new Hollywood style renegade, coming up more like Billy Walsh from Entourage than any actual director I could point at, probably.
Eastwood should have been involved in that. I feel
that would have been amazing.
I mean, the shot where he is resting a shotgun on his knee pointed upward at the typewriter while Pete is like dictating script notes to him is the most Billy Walsh type shit I've ever seen in a movie. It's so sick.
Absolutely. I do like when it starts to get into this industry stuff where you've seen him be completely and become more and more unhinged as the movie goes on. And yet once it hits that point where they have to start the production, all the executives are just telling Pete, like, we don't care how crazy he is. You need to apologize to him. You need to just go with what he wants to do. We've got money on the line, baby. It's hilarious that they just have to feed into that.
Yeah, even though he's pushing everyone as far as he can. Like when his cast and crew and producer finally land, he's still on his expedition. So they're basically like, look, we're no longer using any of the sets you guys already built. We're no longer staying in any of like the hotels in like the African town that we already paid for. We're going to hang out in this local village near my Tusker hunting, where like a local guide and, you know, is there to help me. And when they all arrive, he does the bare minimum of having a banquet table ready for them, where he's wearing a nice dinner jacket and holding a monkey, because as everyone knows, Clint loves monkeys.
Oh yeah, dude.
And he literally goes, okay, everyone, welcome to like my little slice of Africa. And you're all, and everyone just kind of goes, hey, look, he's putting a little effort into here. And and that's the scene where it is like the producer needs to straight up be like, okay, what are you doing, man? Why are you putting on like this big like song and dance for this entire thing? And he goes, hey, my role of the great hunter is strictly my business. It's a sacred subject, much like the sex life of my mother. It's something that you'll refrain from talking or thinking about. It's a subject beyond your little Balkan mind, a passion beyond you. It's just like, straight up humiliates him, and then makes his producer have a fight with his monkey, which is captured in this like Werner Herzog style, like wide angle handheld chaos. It's like,
I love when it cuts to the monkey cam, just like soaring across the table, knocking shit over. Just Clint going monkey cam was very unexpected. I kind of forgot about that sequence on rewatch.
Yeah. It's like that's crazy. And then he just straight up does go like, hey, the first day of shooting, when he finally goes, I guess I have to commit a little bit to this production. He gets lucky. There's a rainstorm, and it turns into a multi-day, possible multi-week rainstorm. And he's like, hey, can't shoot anything today. Guess I'm going back to the hunt.
Hunting.
You know?
Yeah. And what's interesting too, I think he chooses this location and paints it as like this more authentic place for the movie. So it's a more authentic village, and it'll just work better for the art of it all. And I just love how it's feeding into that. And then as soon as, like you said, the rain starts to happen, and he's just taking advantage of every single little thing that can happen so that he doesn't have to do the work. He still gets his payroll, and he gets to shoot an elephant in the face.
Yep.
Or does he?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I found the most fascinating about this movie, because I kind of thought I knew where this was going. And, you know, I knew at some point that, you know, maybe he'd take the shot and maybe he'd feel bad about it, or it wouldn't get him the catharsis he was looking for. I was shocked by the actual ending of this movie, which is him finding the elephant that he has been pursuing. But once again, it is in another sort of like a dangerous herd of elephants that could result in a stampede. And so he gets this African guide whose village he's been staying at, Kivu, and he basically says, hey, look, if he says that I can take the shot and we can go for it anyway, despite the danger levels, then we can do it, because realistically it's like, how many more chances am I going to get? I've been waiting days and weeks and I have to start shooting this movie. Am I really going to get another chance, to do this? And the literally the other guide goes, that's not really a reason to do something that's wrong.
Yeah.
Just
because you can and you'll never get to do it again. Not great.
Yeah. And he's basically like, I don't care. I'm going to do it. Kivu agrees. And they get close enough that they disturb the elephants, and he aims down sight and he's unable to pull the trigger. He simply stares it down. And, you're not sure whether he finally sees the same thing Pete does, where he sees something bigger than himself, or he just, he realizes that this is like entirely this kind of like fantasy image, and that he's not really this guy that he keeps pretending he wants to be. But before he can finish having whatever existential crisis is taking place on Clint Eastwood's face in the moment when he's aimed down the barrel, it's a great shot, a little baby elephant wanders over to them, near him enough that its parent starts charging over to them, and it just gruesomely gores Kivu in this like crazy series of like spinning camera moments, and you just see the carnage of what it does to this guy. And here is like clearly the one like indigenous man experiencing the full-blown violence of what his colonialist fantasy ultimately was. And Clint's shocked and horrified and like guilt-ridden face over what it is that he just caused, and how like the stupor that he gets put into, the way that he is just so immediately humbled by that shocking gesture is nuts. And then literally the kind of just like the flow of the ending is like, well, I guess I just go back to being a Hollywood film director, which sounds like the most like cushiony, like obviously like, he didn't really suffer any consequences for that. And you could argue that materially that's true. The psychic landscape he draws of that character, though, and how lifeless and hollow he sits back down in that chair, I just thought was gut-wrenching. I couldn't believe the power he milked out of that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he can't even call action. It's like the words can't escape his mouth. And you could, to draw it out in terms of like a psychoanalytic analysis of the film, that since this is such a film of masculinity, the climax is his castration moment. Like he, when he puts the safety back on that rifle, he loses his member. And then if that masculinity is what drove him to be such a great artist and adventurer, that's why he can't even get the word action out of his mouth without sounding like he's crying at the end. And it's just like such a great way of dressing him down. And as you said, Josh, like with the colonial fantasy too, it's like, talk about a double whammy of castration and like colonialism gone awry, where he goes to Africa to kill an elephant and instead gets an African killed by an elephant. And it's just like the most, I mean, Clint Eastwood is not a filmmaker you associate with white guilt, but man, does he lay it on thick for this climax. And it's like so effective in my opinion, because you could just broaden that out to be so symbolic of, greater struggles with colonialism and Hollywood on shooting on location. Films like The African Queen and Hatari, smarter scholars than I have definitely written about the post-colonial like hauntings of those movies, despite being great movies. But it's the Hollywood system reinvading Africa essentially 200 or 400 years after the slave trade, and it's just such a downbeat ending that is unexpected from Eastwood, and really just like really does a number on me. Like both times I've watched this, it's shocked me, even though I know what's going to happen the second time I watched it.
Yeah, just to end on a black fade out and only have like the sun is just setting over the landscape. You have the tribal music and the credits. It's just there's there really is nothing but sadness left in you when
the
he
music
calls
being where the
action.
title comes from too, because he's saying like, what are they singing? And he's like, they're
Yes.
telling everyone what happened through song. And he's like, what are they saying? And he's like, white hunter, black heart. And he's just like, fuck.
Yeah,
I'm an asshole.
Yeah, it's really interesting that it's like they use the music as communication, and it's a language that the white tourist can't understand, and it's such a sad thing that's being communicated. Obviously,
It's so
throughout the
mournful,
village.
and hearing the cries of like the family in the background as he sits in the director's chair and just begrudgingly calls action.
And he and he knows as he's walking that filling sadness that's happening in the scene, more crying happening, and that sound design is revving up. He knows what he's done. He's just like sinking in it. He's just like, now I have to also make a movie here for the next month, however long it takes, and it's incredibly excuse me, it's incredibly devastating. And I really like it's so dark in a way too, that I think he's obviously wrestling with the guilt of what he just did, all of the ridiculous time he's wasted, and then everyone still has to look at him and go, what do we do? You call an action? We're looking for you for direction. This guy that we just saw go completely unhinged for the last like month in Africa is now the one that is at the helm, and it's unbelievable. It's such a good ending to end the movie with the start of the filming is brilliant, I think.
Yeah, and so harrowing. Like, I have to imagine for a Clint going audience in 1990 that they would have had like just no idea what to do with that ending. They would have been like, "This is Dirty Harry. What do you mean? I don't understand."
I will admit too, like
I watched the fourth Dirty Harry movie that features a Guns N' Roses song. What is going on here?
yeah. And I will admit too, like when I was watching this, I was expecting more of the adventure elements within it. There is a lot of drama when we're just talking about strict genre, because you are kind of building this character and his mind. You have to understand his mindset in some regards in order to get to this finale and for it to really work and for you to understand what he's wrestling with when it comes to his ego. So it makes sense to me by the time you get to the end. I was almost expecting almost a more violent psychological deterioration, I guess. I thought there would be more thriller elements when I went into this. I'm not sure. It might have been just the poster, the title. It felt to me like it was going to be
sick poster.
Really gritty, and it ends up not being that. It's really just like existential and psychological. So it kind of threw me off a little bit at first, but I gotta say that the more that I talk about it and the deeper the film goes, it's hard to look away.
Yeah, this was my first time watching it, and if we are pivoting, I think here towards the reductive rating round, this was honestly a pretty high 4 on first watch. Maybe honestly even the Jamie 4. This is one of my like this was one of my Eastwood blind spots I've been kind of holding on to, because there's a number I haven't done, but like I've been really savoring this like 90s period because so many people loved it so much. It took me a long time to get around to Bridges Madison County. When I eventually did, I was just like, yep, that's literally one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life. And this, I had kind of a dissimilar experience just because I did not expect it to be exactly what it was. And so I'm very curious to go back into it and knowing the shape of it a little bit better.
Yeah.
But I will say, it surprised me and it surprised me now, so I can't even imagine what it did for people in 1990 when they were like, yeah, Clint Eastwood was just like getting into like RC car explosive chases and fucking Deadpool and firing bazooka sized harpoons and shit like that, and here he is now tackling a legendary Hollywood film director in just about the most bizarre but also empathetic fashion someone possibly could. And it really did, it's not surprising that this is one of the biggest bombs of his entire career.
Yeah.
There's an exchange in the movie where they go, to write a movie, you must forget anyone's ever going to see it. And Pete kind of retorts back, you're going to make damn sure nobody sees this one. And I was kind of like,
yep.
Yeah.
Sure
I mean,
did.
I think Clint kind of did that one to himself a little bit, but it's such fascinating material. One, it did make me really want to just go and read the book as well, because the idea of just an account of John Huston as, going Moby Dick mode in Africa just sounds crazy. But I do think that Eastwood is uniquely engaged for this and was really ready to just sink his teeth into something. And I do think that this is like really rich, both psychologically, metafictionally, in terms of the myth of, the sort of like macho image that certain people have of themselves, but also the myth of, the sort of renegade Hollywood filmmaker. And it's worth noting that, he applies all of the sturdy-handed simplicity and beauty, I think, that he would be well known for in his 90s period with this film. And a lot of it is the same as you'll see across in Unforgiven, and we'll be talking about next in A Perfect World. But there's something to be said about how wild this performance is and how much he indulges in being this brash and egotistical character who is viewed in this kind of godlike fashion. And of course is going to be, going to play him bitter and drunk and sick and, being torn down to size and all of this stuff. But it is one of those things where I think on some level he does have a self-implicating and self-loathing sense of empathy for why someone would get to this place and the kind of Hollywood power few directors ever got, and also how to, try and, are you being true to yourself or are you projecting something kind of bigger? And is that something that then at a certain point you're going to be humbled when you go out of control and inevitably, and you're maybe going to devastatingly realize that you are not exactly what you thought you are, but there is something sad and relatable about that pursuit, I think, that he sees in it. So I do think it's very easy for this film made by anybody else to just be an unflattering, look what John Huston was up to. Like, isn't that fucked up kind of movie? And I get to the end of this and there's so much existential and like moral weight to what it is that character goes through. And that cut to black just, knocked me out of my chair while Eastwood sits in one. So yeah, very high 4 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, this conversation's made me like the movie a lot more. I really did enjoy it, and I thought that it was incredibly well directed. I think the control behind the camera that Clint Eastwood has while playing an incredibly complicated character himself. I mean, that it's wrestling with a Hollywood leading man and really Clint himself, like as a performer and as an absolute powerhouse in Hollywood. There's a lot to balance here, and it's pretty incredible that he pulled it off. It's a shame that it didn't make money or anything like that. It makes sense. I mean, you watch the film, and I do think it's not the most like approachable movie for the mainstream, probably, but it's very dense, and I think it's an incredible look at a character. And like you said, Josh, I really want to dive into the actual story. If anyone knows of any material that we can read or watch that has some of the history, I would love to read it just to know what is true, what isn't, how far Huston went. It's a pretty wild story, but yeah, so I don't know.
Hopefully he didn't get an African killed.
Yeah. I'm really hoping that didn't happen. Yeah, exactly. Maybe that's all we need to solidify here. But yeah, no, I think the pacing can be a bit slow, but I honestly think that is building into this kind of the existential crisis his character's going through, and also the stress that everyone around him is feeling that built up, like, what are we doing? We're wasting our time. Is he becoming completely unhinged? Can he even do this work? I think that you need all of that build up to that finale in order to really feel that. So it makes sense. I think I just need to probably retackle it, and knowing what it is. It is an incredible movie. I can't deny it. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, this is a movie that, I mean, if we're going on the Sleazoid scale of not including the half points, then it's absolutely a 5 for me. I only reserve that little half, in extended clip terms, half bullet for the very, very, very top of the mountain Clint movies. But this is basically there for me. I mean, it's one that doesn't have the genre thrills that a lot of his movies do, but it still has the humor that all of his movies movies do.
Definitely.
But more than almost anything I've seen by him, it's the one that just sticks in your craw and makes you think about the thematic concerns so much after you watch it. Like, let alone certain scenes sticking in your head. It's ideas that stick in your head. And Eastwood has always been a filmmaker who has had, like, you know, you could call them ideas movies, but they still had their genre roots in them and very memorable scenes. But this really feels like an ideas movie more than anything, which is not what you totally expect from, you know, the master of genre filmmaking, Dirty Harry himself and The Man with No Name, you know. And I just
Jonathan Rosenbaum literally described it as Brechtian. So if you want to see if you want to see Clint, Dirty Harry goes Brechtian. White Hunter, Black Heart's what you're looking for.
And he's absolutely on the money there, too. Like, this is the movie that calls into question the mythology of the masculine director more than almost anything I've ever seen. You know, like, this is just such a dense, rich text in that regard, as well as just playing with history. And I just think it's fantastic. And yeah, it's a 5 for me.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up there for White Hunter, Black Heart. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be skipping on over to A Perfect World. Stick around.
At least now we know who's in charge.
In a new film by Academy Award-winning director Clint Eastwood.
You ever ridden in a time machine before? Out there, that's the future. And back there, well, that's the past. This is the present, Philip. Enjoy it while it lasts.
A Perfect World.
All right, we are back, and we are talking A Perfect World, the 1993 American road movie crime drama directed by Clint Eastwood, written by John Lee Hancock, and starring Kevin Costner as Butch Haynes, an escaped convict who kidnaps and takes a young boy hostage, a young Jehovah's Witness boy, for his cross-county runaway attempt that he is making, and in the process kind of becomes a bit of a strange quasi-father figure to the little boy. And Eastwood, this time in a little bit more of a minor supporting role as the aging veteran Texas Ranger lawman in pursuit of them both. This obviously comes out after the failure of White Hunter, Black Heart, where Eastwood was, I think, forced to do, once again, the more commercial Warner Brothers film that they were like, yeah, you owe us one, which was The Rookie. And then after that, he was able to, after many years of holding on to the script, he was able to finally play William Mooney in Unforgiven, for which he would receive his big Oscar wins, and which was so successful that he was back to being able to greenlight basically whatever material he wanted. And in this case, he found the script by then newcomer Mr. John Lee Hancock. And yes, that is John Lee Hancock of The Blind Side fame and Saving Mr. Banks fame and every Lights, Camera, Jackson core movie you can possibly think of. And it's okay. He gets a lifetime pass of making nearly unwatchable movies based on this script alone, in my opinion, which was a very hot script at the time. It was passed over by Spielberg, who instead opted for Jurassic Park, which makes a lot of sense. That speaks to Spielberg's sensibility. Honestly, I can't see why he was asked, because like on the one hand, you've got like a little bit of the sentimental relationship with the kid and like the daddy issue stuff going on. But it also does bear a little resemblance to the kind of films he made like early on. Like if you think about the Sugarland Express or Duel, like there's Sugarland Express, especially because it's like also a cross like county like chase and road movie, and it's about convicts who hijack a cop car and try to drive home to the home of, I think, where their kid has been like put up for adoption. Like they try to get their own kid back. And it includes some like Texas country side like chase movie isms with like troopers and reporters and, you know, vigilantes and all this kind of stuff. And you do end up kind of growing to sympathize with the criminals while they're being chased by the cop, who is also like an aging lawman who, you know, kind of feels regretful about the place that that's eventually going to go to. So I could see why someone wrote a script like that and was like, the Sugarland Express guy, we're getting that guy. But at that time, Spielberg was like, no, I'm all in on my Jurassic Park era. So it eventually went to Clint Eastwood, who was hot off the commercial success, obviously, of Unforgiven, but also In the Line of Fire, which is when he received the script. He was making that with Wolfgang Petersen, and he basically was like, yeah, I see my angle into this movie. It was also an opportunity to work with Kevin Costner, who was huge at the time, hot off Dances with Wolves, JFK, and unfortunately for both of them, it was an underwhelming release. Not critically. People seem to really like the movie. They liked the performance. They liked the direction. But it and it has been, I think, since very much you know, kind of reevaluated as one of Clint Eastwood's stronger movies. But yeah, at the time, it, you know, kind of went on to just like, you know, kind of just do so-so for
it made its money back.
I guess it was big in overseas. I was going to say,
it made its money back in North America, but was huge overseas. And I'm not going to look into like which country, but I'm going to guess that the French loved this one.
The French, they you can always count on the French.
Eastwood. Yes. I mean, for those who don't know about the French's relationship with auteurism, obviously that's where it was invented, but Eastwood specifically, you know, like he'll show up in top 10 of Cahiers du Cinema, like for stuff like Hereafter, which just gets completely wrecked in the US, but the Cahiers du Cinema critics know what's up. And I am saying that as a full-fledged endorsement of Hereafter, a great movie, but we're talking about A Perfect World here.
Yeah, this is one that's really interesting because for me it is, and the first time I watched it I was like blown away by it, and this was years ago now, like maybe like 2017. It was like one of the ones that I had always heard about and had never seen, and it's very sneakily is one of the more complex and heart-wrenching movies in his catalog of movies. And I think part of it is because on its surface, and what I've already maybe described to you in the log line, it is the same type of like sentimental Americana pablum that would like define John Lee Hancock's career after penning this movie. And it does adhere to many of the sort of conventional genre movie pleasures that maybe Jamie was saying we're kind of missing in White Hunter, Blackheart. Like this is kind of a little bit of a cops and crooks, like manhunt procedural meets like a buddy road movie, but like the buddy is like a little kid. And like you pitch that to someone and they kind of go, hey, like, yeah, that sounds good. And a lot of dads just liked watching Clint Eastwood, like having hangout, charm, fun on the road with like a little kid. He's like, oh, look at this little kid shoplifting. And like, it gives you those basic things that I think you're looking for when you hear this log line, unless your name is Leonard Maltin, in which case, because Will Sloan actually pointed out his negative review from '93, which was literally him saying something new in screen entertainment, a manhunt movie with no urgency and no suspense. And the funniest thing about that is that like I don't even think I can necessarily say that he's wrong. It's just one of those things that like it's exactly what the movie wants to be, because Eastwood was able to find a way to slot this material comfortably beside the rest of his 90s run of these kind of ambivalent, like elder statesman, like deconstructionists attempts at like macho movie myth making. And like it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, I'm going to do my cops and robbers movie. I'm going to do like my you know, my chase movie. I'm going to do all of these things, but I'm going to do it in this deliberately really tender and rambling and kind of wounded register where I think Eastwood and Hancock just both shared a certain love in this moment for the kind of ambiguity and kind of simplicity and the sort of depth of how they handle the emotional realities of these very flawed characters. And I think how that stuff ended up kind of interacting with the more schematic genre movie components of the movie kind of deepens both. Because the first time I went into this, I was like, oh, this is going to be like a on the run movie, or it's going to be like even like a Hicksploitation, like Burt Reynolds thing or something. And then when I actually watched the movie, I was like, why am I crying about about the idea of like the tragic relationship between fathers and sons, and why am I thinking about like the process of justice and rehabilitation and abuse in America? I was like, what are these things? I was absolutely floored the very first time I watched it, and I was glad on rewatch to just be like, have even more, I think, connection to it.
Yeah. I think the John Lee Hancock thing also, it's like, film is a director's medium, and sometimes a screenwriter with bad tendencies needs a great director to rein them in a little bit. There's like Aaron Sorkin is the best example of this, someone who I can't say I'm a fan of, but then I watch The Social Network and I'm like, oh, this is the best written movie of all time. And it's because of the way that Fincher whips him into shape, and it takes multiple appearances of a phenomenon to create a trend. But it's not just a perfect world. John Lee Hancock also was an uncredited rewriter on Bad Boys 2. So he could do everything.
Hell yeah.
Okay, I've changed my mind. He's the GOAT. Now. He's literally the GOAT.
Oh, yeah, Hancock rocks, dude. Make as many blindsides as you want. I don't give a shit.
Yeah. If there's a chance in hell that you are the one who wrote the words blue power, then at the White
blue power motherfucker or whatever. Yeah.
If you wrote that scene, you have an all-time pass.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And this does kind of take a more conventional approach with how it's structured. I mean, really a lot of this, after we'll get into like the introduction and everything and how they get into that place. But a lot of it really is just the back and forth between Butch and the kid kind of playing father son, and him teaching him life lessons, or like pseudo life lessons, and then you go back to Laura Dern,
life lessons.
Yes and you go back to Laura Dern and Clint Eastwood on the case, and 9 times out of 10 it's kind of like they've shown up at the place they were just at and questioning people and kind of just uncovering things. They find we'll get to it, they find their own ways of being interesting. I will say I do find it like every time Butch and the kid was on screen, I was more like, let's fucking go. Like, I just want to hear every life lesson that Butch has to deliver here. But they find some really good character moments with Laura Dern and Clint as well.
Yeah, well, because I mean, that's the distinction here, is that this really is more of a character thing. So by the time you get to you're hanging out with like the cops who are doing the procedural investigation stuff, very little of it is like the scenes where they do any of the procedure or like they do investigating or they do any mystery, or like they don't do any of that stuff. It's more of like a philosophical debate of like the moral weight of being the guy who has to chase down someone who maybe you think has, had it bad and is doing and just reacting to a horrible situation. And I think that is kind of the power of the movie in a way, because it was funny, critics at the time, and I think stylistically I understand where they're coming from, and I guess in terms of ideas and like the sort of weight that it sort of builds, a lot of people were thinking about movies like Badlands and kind of Bonnie and Clyde, but honestly the movie I've always thought about this in comparison to is an Eastwood one that he was in but didn't direct, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. Okay. Because it has a similar ratio of kind of like warmth and weariness to its kind of like crime road movie antics. And it's very similarly about like, again, Eastwood in the 70s was playing like the older guy and he's playing like the old vet in that movie of like, a guy who commits heists and stuff like that. And part of the sort of, the concept of the movie is he's kind of mourning what should have been a torch being passed, but like there's a death he's partially responsible for that he has to wrestle with, and it's a very similar emotion that I think is being expressed in the chase aspect of this movie. It's just broadening his view out to like the entire history of like these boys who never had a chance and whose lives have been ruined by some systemic capacity, some institutional thing that's happening within the country, and the cycle is going to continue happening even when people kind of mean well or try to change it or anything like that. And so there really is kind of like a larger tragedy at play, despite the fact that this movie totally luxuriates in the details of just being like, we're on the road with a criminal and he's got a little boy with him, and look at these guys having fun together. And I think that those two things play so beautifully together. it ends up sneaking up on you, the weight of what this movie is doing. And I think by the end, and when they really pull off like the 40-minute long finale of like a fucking funeral march to the ending, you kind of probably already know it's it really does hit.
Yeah. And I mean, anytime that there's a story about a kid kind of just being introduced to the adult world, is always fascinating to me. It just leaves so much room for like philosophical questions and these kind of really harsh life lessons that I just think are just more impactful when you're looking at it through a kid's eyes. And also connecting the White Hunter, Black Heart. It is cool to watch Clint's character again as an old timer kind of wrestle with the system that he's been playing in for decades. There's like a moment eventually that reveals that, you know, he was very harsh on Butch like decades ago. And that's kind of what that harsh sentence is what has created the lifestyle that now he's accustomed to and Butch has kind of fallen into. So it just relates again to him kind of wrestling with the idea of being in a certain industry for so long, being kind of seasoned in it, being intelligent and really good at it. But then also it's kind of so complicated and at times contradictory that there's certain things you just can't control. And now he's kind of, I guess, kind of trying to rewind time a little bit and make it up to him in some way.
Well, as Eddie said, himself. Time travel.
Yeah. And it's really, I think,
Absolutely.
almost to make it up to himself rather than Butch in general, but it's complicated.
Yeah.
Well, for me, and we'll get to it when we get to like the specifics of it, I think for me, it kind of felt like an admission of failure.
Yeah.
The other Clint Eastwood movie that this really reminds me of is Honky Tonk Man. Have you guys seen that one?
I've actually not seen Honky Tonk Man, but I've heard it's fantastic.
That is my favorite Eastwood movie, and I think there's a reason why this is another one of my favorite Eastwood movies. That one sees Clint Eastwood loosely portraying the life of country legend Jimmy Rogers, who was dying of tuberculosis and driving around the country in this movie with his nephew, played by Kyle Eastwood, I believe it is, Clint's son. And, you know, but it's his nephew in the movie, and he's like going to record his music, to like lay down his legacy before he dies. But it has a lot of the same stuff as this one of just like the on the road antics and a man teaching a boy who's not his son, but is like might as well be his son, life lessons about outlaw morality. And I just find that like that mode of Eastwood is so perfect for this. And that's another reason why this is so great, is because Eastwood finally realized, okay, I'm too old to be the hero now. Like I actually can't play the hero in this. I'll let Kevin Costner do it, and I'll be the cop leading the manhunt, you know? But yeah, I think that this just has so much Eastwood DNA in it. It's such a perfect script for him to hop on board with.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love this very beginning where it's showing you these images that we're gonna get, you know, in more context at the end. But at first, it's almost just kind of this slow motion dream where Costner or Butch is in a field, and you know these like dollar bills are floating over his head. He's got the mask that we'll find out what that is. That's in relation to later on, and it's right beside him. But then it starts to
Casper,
get into
the friendly ghost, baby.
Oh yeah, and then it starts to get into this weird thing where you start to see the slow motion helicopter that's above him, and you're like, well, this doesn't seem as relaxing and dreamlike, you know, just napping in a field or whatever he's going through at the time. And it's cool that it kind of like sinks you into that, or it slowly dishes that information out and then just takes you away from it. It's
a good like atmospheric like tone setter for us to then kind of flash back to Butch while he's pulling his like man escape from Alcatraz style like prison break where he's gonna, you know, flee his Texas jail. So you get the basics, the breaking through the vent, the using the bed sheets as the rope, and having an employee sort of like drive them out at gunpoint, and essentially in looking for a place to hide and kind of get some food or steal themselves specifically a Ford, not a Buick. It's very important to him. He breaks into the house of this young Jehovah's Witness boy named Philip, played by TJ Lowther, and his mother, and who his co-escapee cellmate accomplice named Terry he doesn't like very much and thinks of as kind of an ugly liability to his escape, tries to assault the mother, but Butch is very much like, no, we don't do that kind of shit. And his first interaction is in front of the kid, stopping his mother from getting assaulted, and then having him pick up the gun while in his underwear and telling him to like, tell me to stick him up. He's like, okay, you've got it. And then using him as a human shield when the neighbor rolls in with a double barrel shotgun. It's a very complex, rollicking sense of emotions that kid goes through when before they end up all three of them hitting the road together. But it's very clear that like Butch has a very interesting relationship with his life as a career criminal, because he's someone who clearly hasn't become completely sociopathic like his buddy and has some affection for this kid, to the point where, you know, he much prefers him as a companion to the convict, who is like very slimy and very hot tempered. And, you know, he ends up basically being like, you know, he ends up actually just straight up killing him when the guy tries to like threaten the kid. He's just like, don't fucking hurt this kid. I'd rather hang out with this kid.
Yeah.
I also love the way their paths lead up to intersecting with each other. The kid and Butch, that is, because during that escape thing, it's a thematic through line of intercutting both of these guys, because they're both basically imprisoned. You know, this film sees the strict Jehovah's Witness family unit as basically being a form of imprisonment for this kid, as he has to watch the rest of his neighborhood have a good old time for Halloween, while like the kid just
cannot
so
trick or treat, man.
I mean,
it's like,
imagine
it's
the
so fucked up
of your classmates coming up to trick or treat at your house. They're like, wait, why aren't you trick or treating? It's like, you know, I guess.
And the kid wouldn't.
It does lead to that great moment of dialogue where Costner gets to go to him. He's like, listen to me, Philip. You know, you have a red, white, and blue American right to eat cotton candy and ride roller coasters. And his little, I do?
Yeah.
He's going to liberate this kid with America.
And the irony, too, of them, like, they wouldn't even be there if their mother let them just celebrate Halloween like normal kids would. It's just that religious control is actually kind of what brings him into this crazy, chaotic adventure. So I love that little bit of irony. And same thing with the mindset of Butch, like having that beginning with the whole dreamlike, and then having these moments. There's these constant interruptions of him being a little bit more content, being calmer, being even intelligent at times. And then the world just kind of presents him with a scenario in which he has to survive, and now he's flipped completely. Now he's a contradiction of that character that he once was. And like, he does good when he can, but that's just it. It's only when he can, and being on the run as a criminal, there's this survival aspect to it that he's constantly wrestling with. And we find out that that's kind of related to his past too, with Clint, which I kind of mentioned earlier on. The system.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like the way that he describes it to the kid at one point, which is basically, he says, like, I ain't a good man and I ain't the worst neither. I'm just a breed apart, which, if that doesn't define like decades of Clint Eastwood characters, you know, he just he says it because he wants to kind of at a certain point place his sort of existential melodrama that he's experiencing as like this really horribly abandoned and basically abused child who was made into what he was, in direct conversation with the procedural manhunt that he is in, and that his entire life has kind of been in some capacity, where he's at times in this story, he's a man who's capable of kind of justice-driven thinking when it comes to what's morally wrong and right outside of the law. Like, he's like, this criminal wants to hurt this kid, and I think that is wrong. Or there's a whole bunch of ways, too, we'll get into, where he wordlessly observes the casual verbal and physical abuse of children by various normal families that they run into during the travels. And he's really sensitive to that, obviously, for his backstory we'll get into. But as well, on top of that, because of the system he's grown up in, he's also capable of being very angry and very violent, and, you know, something that's been taught to him going through the American prison system. So, you know, every time that contradiction of like, clearly he has a tender and warm connection with Philip, and at the same time, I feel like every time Eastwood shows you reaching for his gun, you get it from the perspective of Philip, who is like, that is a tool for doing evil.
Yeah.
Like there's literally not a good reason for you to be doing that. And I can't reconcile that with the easygoing charm of America's favorite movie star, Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
That's fucked up. Actually, people at the time were upset. They were like, Kevin Costner's playing like an evil, like a sociopathic like killer or something. Like this doesn't make any sense. And there were people who were genuinely upset by that, despite the fact that you actually watch the movie and you're like, this is like the nicest, coolest, most charming version of this type of character you could possibly play.
Yeah, Costner, I think, is perfect for this role because of that typecast.
Oh, he's awesome.
He has, right?
It's one of my favorite Costner performances.
So it's a great flip where he does get to have those gritty moments still that you might not expect from Costner, but all of those moments where he is with the kid teaching him about life is classic Kevin Costner, all-American, the all-American dad, basically.
Well, and he gets to kind of be a badass in some points too. I like that bit where he alpha checks his buddy when he's just teaches him the difference between a threat and a fact.
Oh, definitely.
Just fucking breaks his nose right in front of him.
Which is one of the first.
And then he gives Philip the gun, and he's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go into that store and I'm gonna go get some smokes." And he's literally like, "You hold this gun in this guy's head. He moves. You shoot this guy." And I was like, "Damn,
Yeah, and it's wild. And at first too, you're thinking like, did he just actually put the kid in a position in which he can shoot a guy in the face? And then as the scene goes on, you realize he didn't give him bullets. So there's these constant like, okay, he is smart enough to do that. He's not that insane. That's nice. But even the things like the nose break is kind of that first example of him doing something where he's almost teaching Philip some type of like lesson about committing to your word, but he's doing it through the use of violence and breaking somebody's nose, and that's the example. Like another thing is when, well, it's later on, but you were talking about when we see certain father figures beating their kids, and he's upset about that, of course. So he's like, don't beat kids, but then in front of the kids, I'm gonna put the gun to your head and like pistol whip you, and so there's these. Yeah,
he has a very like a blurred mind
right,
about
exactly.
some of the ways that he thinks about these things. And you do get that part of it is that it's part of his upbringing. It's part of maybe he still is kind of has a juvenile thinking about certain things. And he clearly didn't grow up like around other people and isn't like socially as so, I was reminded of some of the ways that like Michael Mann depicts the prison rehabilitation, like when Jimmy Caan gets out in Thief, the way that he literally doesn't know how to have like normal interactions with people because everything is based on the survival techniques that he's learned. Yeah. And I feel kind of similarly about how the Costner character behaves in here, except what's interesting is that for Eastwood, I think this type of behavior in one of his older movies would have been heroic behavior. It would have been the drifter outlaw who would like go in and save a town. You need a guy like this. And in this movie, it's like the world has changed and he's kind of a pathetic criminal with a sob story to a lot of people in a way. But on the other end, it's also like you have so much deep empathy for, he's in a time where these skills are just illegal and wrong and have very little social redeeming value. Whereas Eastwood would normally, I think, see these qualities as, incredibly heroic and not the thing that's getting the cowboy to chase you down.
Yeah.
Well, he's also just a man completely out of time. And that's like such a big thing about, people being let out of prison in movies and in real life, of course. And especially in, I'm watching for, the umpteenth time right now, The Sopranos. And in season 5, there's that thing where like a bunch of guys get out of jail who had been in jail for 20 plus years. And it's really just a cheat to introduce a bunch of great actors to the show. But I love how in this one, Costner is like, he's clearly been in jail for almost all of his life. As they describe, he first killed a man when he was 8 years old. And so we're in the 1960s right now. We know that they talk about how President Kennedy is going to come by the Dallas, which is a great little foreshadowing. Of course, maybe a little too obvious.
America is about to lose its innocence, do you think?
Yeah,
I don't know.
But also just that, like, Costner's character is like an old school outlaw too. He is not like a 60s guy. Like Kevin Costner's character has no idea about the impeding countercultural shift that's going to come, you know. He doesn't know anything about like what rock and roll is or anything like that. You know, the Beatles are already making hit records over in the UK at this point, but he is such an old school guy that it
blasting all those 50s country tunes.
Exactly. He likes the old country stuff, even earlier than 50s at some point, you know? And he is just like using the car as a time machine, as he says quite literally later on in maybe the film's best monologue. And I just feel like the out of time element is so perfect for something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that monologue you're talking about is fantastic. It's really where the movie really transitions into being the warm and tender kind of like buddy movie for a while, because the kid is like genuinely he's a little freaked out about the fact that he's been just literally picked up by the strange man who's riding around in his car and is clearly like a tool that he's weaponizing in some capacity. And the way that Costner flips it on him and goes, "No, man, like we're friends. You know, you're my navigator. This is a 20th century time machine, and you know we're going to enjoy the present." And the way that he turns their crime spree into like this road trip game, and he's like teaching him how to pee outside and how to scope out the farmer's Ford that they end up stealing. And he's like, we're going to drink RC Cola, we're going to listen to the radio, we're going to come up with like these alter ego names, which end up being Buzz and Edgar Poe, which is very funny. He takes them, you know, clothes shopping at Friendly's, which is where he shoplifts for the first time the Casper Halloween costume that he gets, because obviously part of what Eddie was saying is the sort of freedom. This kid is kind of experiencing freedom and decision making and independence from his own religion and his own mother and all this kind of stuff. And that's when he, you know, is even presented with his first opportunity to run off, but he chooses to stay because he was like, well, I thought if I was going to get caught, they were going to like send me to jail and I was going to go to hell. And Costner's like, same difference, kid. You know, the way that I look at it, the stealing's wrong, but if there's something you need bad and you ain't got the money, then it's okay to take a loaner item. You know, it's what you call an exception to the rule. He's giving him some of that, like, you know, that outlaw poetry, and in some ways is like becoming, you know, his surrogate father who left him, but Philip is kind of, you know, becoming Butch's chance at like a childhood that he didn't get to have, and they're kind of both serving a purpose for one another in this really interesting way, while also standing in for a little bit of the sort of masculinity stuff that Eastwood was very interested in looking at. There's one incredible moment in this that has always flabbergasted me, and I should just read the script and see if it's in there or not. But the literal dick measuring joke is so fucking funny because the way that it's set up too is that it's during the altercation with the co-escapee who that Costner ends up killing. But before that, he says, you know, that they kidnapped the kid, and the kid's like in his like tidy whities, and he's just like, you know, and he looks down at his you know, his fucking crotch, and he's just like, you know, kind of puny, ain't it? Like challenging the little boy's like masculinity. And then when he later he brings it up with with Costner, because he's actually putting clothes on for the first time that they just stole from the store. He's just like, oh, well, it's tiny. I don't want to take my drawers off. And he's just like, your pecker? It's like, what? You got a good size for your boy, or a good size for your age, Philip. Like, come on, man.
Put some confidence in that kid.
It's so good.
Yeah, and it's such that is like a classic, just it's a thing that only the dad could kind of do. You know what I mean? Like the male leader in your life could kind of bring you to, because that is kind of what Terry was representing in that moment. Because doesn't he even, it really heavily implies that he's trying to assault the kid too. And because he's running around pantsless in the field. It's actually a really well directed moment too, where eventually you get to Terry's perspective when he loses the kid in the field and he's kind of crawling around, and then they have him, they think that he finds the kid Philip, and they move the leaves, and it's revealing that it's the handgun that's pointing to his face, and Costner's like, you're fucking done, basically. I thought that segment was fantastic. But yeah, it's a good moment that I think could only happen from that kind of male perspective. So it's funny, and it's strange, of course, because it's like, this is a fucking stranger looking at a child's, you know, whatever, commenting on it. But in the moment, it makes a lot of sense.
And you have to think of it from the perspective of like Butch is a kid who's just like, you know, a grown up kid who really is just being like, yeah, you know, I don't think anyone should like, you know, get your confidence down, kid. Like, come on, I'm trying to teach you like you know, you're just as big and strong as me in some ways. And I think part of what really works about it is just the complexity of both Costner and the kid's performance, which I think are just like so good in moments like that, which sound kind of broad on the page, and when you live in them with those two characters, like this kid performance, it's one of my favorites in any movie I've ever seen because it's so real in a way that's like he's quiet, he's observational, he spends so much of the movie kind of scared and confused about this adult world, but a little curious about it, and he's not at all like that like
face.
Yeah.
God, he's never doing the chatty, like over precocious, like, you know, either humor or competence or the kind of stuff that you would normally see, I think, in a character like this. And you can tell that for Costner, as the character who, you know, has a very blatantly troubled childhood that, you know, brought him to this moment, you can see all of the complexity, I think, in some of the like micro moments that he has on his face and in some of his line deliveries about him like trying to figure out like what it means now that like he's an adult trying to figure out how to like speak to this kid, and you know what type of formative memories he might be imparting onto him, and like the fact that he's now responsible for like protecting him and teaching him, and you know, while being fully aware of like how he was failed, and like there's so much of that happening on his face. He's not saying this to the kid, he's trying to like micromanage the experience for the kid to be like, dude, we're not on like a scary chase from the police, like we're just two pals having a good time. And in fact, I'm gonna like help you be more free than you've ever been in your life and give you a taste of the other side. And there's something about how much is hidden beneath that Costner performance and that character that, you know, eventually we get more literalized, like in that great scene where Laura Dern tells them all Butch's backstory, but she does so in like the first person of like, you know, because she's the sort of by the book state criminologist named Sally, who's assigned to work with the Clint Eastwood sort of Texas Ranger, who, due to the high profile nature of the crime and the sort of manhunt, is, you know, having this like team enforced on him. And it's her, and it's also a very strangely kind of good performance by Bradley Whitford as the FBI marksman Bobby, who's just like cold, slick, and just like really disturbing. He's the federal agent who is like, you know, has nothing to do with like who's the guy who's literally just there to shoot to kill if necessary, whereas like Laura Dern is there to kind of like argue for the humanity of this criminal. She's someone who spent time with him and someone who is directly addresses like parole cases and like, you know, penile escapes and like all that kind of stuff. And she gets a fantastic scene in the like high tech like traveling RV that they hit the road in that the governor gives them. And she tells this story about Butch being, you know, he grew up in a brothel with his mom. He killed a man, as Eddie said, when he was 8, trying to protect his mom. But his mom ended up getting syphilis and killing herself, and he gets taken in by his like abusive father and gets brought in for joyriding and gets an unfriendly judge who gives him 4 years of like hard time rather than juvie, and then, you know, becomes a lock for being basically a criminal for the rest of his life. And we later learn that, as Jamie was alluding to, that like Red was also the sheriff who recommended that harsh punishment because he thought separating the boy from his father would like straighten him out, and instead it just made him feel more mistreated and more abandoned, and resulted in him becoming this ain't a good man, ain't the worst man, but I have some flaws, we'll say. Which
does relate to later on when like it goes into the fathers that are abusing their sons. There's a certain point where it's like I think Costner's character even points it out. He's like, look, you're literally losing the trust of your boy like in front of you by doing this kind of thing. And it just directly relates to that within like the system. It's just like there's this distrust to the system. There's the distrust to authority figures because of this harsh sentencing, because of what you could consider like an abusive sentence. And that is just all it's going to do is create a retaliation, just a they're just going to swing the other way, essentially.
Yeah, because I mean, if this is what his country is telling him justice is, he's like, that shit is fucked up.
Yeah,
you know, and I mean, it's where the title of the movie comes from too, because you know, for Laura Dern and for the Clint Eastwood character, like they spend so much of the movie locked into this kind of larger philosophical debate on how to best treat and kind of rehabilitate criminals. And I think at one point, I forget who it is who says it, but it's like, in a perfect world, we'd all lock arms and thrash arms until like he turns up. And she's basically like, in a perfect world, things like these wouldn't happen. You know, and like we would not be chasing this kid who we institutionalized and made into a violent person just because the instincts of, as she calls him, the hillbilly Sherlock Holmes, because the cowboy cop used his nose and was just like, you know, what this kid needs is, you know, some hard time, really shape him up. And it's like, it's not how it works, man.
Yeah.
Like children don't, you know, they don't react that way.
Well, I also think that's kind of why he gives Philip so many, there's a few moments in this, and the big one is when he shoplifts and goes like, are you going to stay or come? But he gives him so many choices throughout this, and I think it's to build this kind of confidence that he's doing with the father-son dynamic. Then it's also giving him kind of the choice that he didn't have as a kid. It does feel like Butch was in a position in which he had to do these things. I mean, if you have to kill somebody at 8 years old, that was probably based on survival and defense of some kind. I doubt you made that conscious
Which is
decision.
also why the ending of this film, I'll say, is incredibly poetic, because that kid gets put into the position where he does have to make that exact same decision.
Right. So it's kind of like he's trying his best in whatever resources that he has to give the kid the choices that he never had, or at least a choice. Maybe not the choices, but a choice, some type of agency, you know.
But you can also tell that he's.
Oh, go
ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say.
No, Eddie, jump in.
The characterization of Butch here as this adult child, you know, because Laura Dern tells us that he is the smartest person in this whole operation, whether it's the cops or the criminals we're talking about. But at the same time, he is this person who's been in correctional facilities since he was a child. So, you know, he's not going to go out and like get drunk when he goes out. He's going to get out of there and eat mustard sandwiches and drink RC colas, you know, like still has the pleasures of a child. And that's why he's like gobsmacked that this kid doesn't know the pleasures of eating cotton candy and riding roller coasters. And by the way, that's
what being a kid's all about. What do you mean?
I know. The immediate satisfaction of that, when he's just like, oh, you don't know what a roller coaster is? All right, I'm tying you to the roof of the car now.
Yeah.
It's just so great, because it's like, yeah, this guy's clearly a very smart criminal, but he also has the mind of a child. And Costner, like his effortless charisma makes that such a compelling character. And I also just, you know, to talk more about the ship, as they call it, the mobile headquarters, this like for the 60s, very futuristic type of, mobile headquarters RV trailer type thing that they're conducting this manhunt,
which they do literally get into a chase in at one point, which is very funny. So that's where some of the Eastwood humor comes back into play during some of the procedural manhunt stuff like that.
Yeah, and they refer to it as a ship, like both they do and the Costner and the kid, and it reminded me a lot of something you referred to, Josh, in our White Hunter Black Heart discussion, Moby Dick. You know, it's another one where it's like, this is a nearly existential thing of this cop, Red, who has been essentially chasing this guy for 30 years, even if he's already locked him up once before. And Moby Dick, think about that. What's the pleasures of Moby Dick? It's about learning about the pleasures of life and earth and all of the things beyond whale hunting. You know, Moby Dick is about as much, about whale hunting as it is life itself and living an interior life and the way that you interact with others who have been living very interior lives as well. And A Perfect World is just like that, in my opinion. You know, it's clear to me that Red has been ruminating on his punishment of Haynes, years and years before, and is like a very complicated person who's torn in all these different directions. And clearly Butch has had so much time while in prison to live this internal life and lead these days of long thoughts and whatnot. And then also just aboard the ship, the character dynamics. He's being pulled in one direction by Bradley Whitford, who is this cold, calculating FBI sniper who just wants to fucking get him in the scope and pull the trigger. And you have Laura Dern, who's the more humanist criminologist. And, both of those things are versions of government bureaucracy that Clint has lambasted in other movies, but here they're just like pulling him in such different directions. He's splitting it into two characters very cleverly, and I just think that it gets into, as I said, like near existential type stuff about both Eastwood and Costner's characters while on the road, thinking about the meaning of their lives.
Yeah, you just have to imagine if Ahab had an aside where he was like, I do love tater tots, though.
Yeah.
That's some of my favorite Clint stuff. Every
So
time
good.
he's so
about to
good
leave.
at those.
He's about to give up too. Eastwood at that point, this is after they have a car chase where just as fate happens, the mobile HQ passes by Costner and the kid going the other direction. They turn around and have a chase, and the trailer gets detached from its truck, which is just classic Eastwood like action humor where you have a trailer not attached to anything, just like going 50 miles an hour right next to a truck.
Yeah.
And the guys in the truck just being like, that's a strange sight.
And in all the wreckage, Eastwood is ready to just pack it in, and then the other guy in the truck is like, hey, there's some T-bone steaks and tater tots in here. You want to just like keep going at this, It's just such classic Eastwood humor.
Let's get a dang barbecue going out here.
Yeah, the trailer and truck side by side did remind me of like a classic Eastwood or like a Burt Reynolds gag or something like that too.
Oh, totally.
Which is really cool.
That could be in Smokey and the Bandit for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, especially the bit when they rip by, and because the way that they see each other is because, again, Costner is a fucking child, and he's like, yeah, look at this big truck. If we honk and we do this at it, they'll honk back at us, and they do that. It creates this big noise enough for Laura Dern to look out the window and see the Philip in his Casper costume that he's just shoplifted, waving and smiling at like the big truck that they just honked at, not knowing what it was that they honked at. And Laura Dern goes, what costume did they say that the kids stole when they got into that that honestly kind of Burt Reynolds style like small town sort of like altercation with the cops where Costner just keeps ramming cop cars around until he's like, okay, Philip, let's get out of here.
I love that there's those moments again of the father-son dynamic. Like he's helping him with the traveling. The kid's actually like telling him where to go on the map. I like that there's the classic honk and the wave, like it would be a family trip or something like that. And then when the chase sequence actually happens and he's still, he's got to be in convict mode again. He still does certain dad things, like because Philip isn't sitting down and it's kind of dangerous for him. And Philip's like, why do I have to sit down? He's just like, because I said so. And like he's getting just frustrated, like a dad not giving him any real reasoning. It's just like we're in a pickle right now. Okay, just do what I say. I like those developments. They're both like, it's funny because it builds the whole idea of what the characters are going through and the relationship they're building, but then you still get the classic Eastwood gags that are that don't, honestly, I don't think really undermine any of the seriousness of the moments. There's I
don't think so either. I think they're necessary because the hangout charm of what it is that those two guys are trying to do within the actual genre situation they're in is like the humanity of the movie.
Yeah.
It is so much of Butch trying to be like, we are living a father, like even just briefly, we're living in the present, but we are living a father and son kind of dynamic where you'll get subtle little moments like just that one where Butch pulls the car over. He stole that guy's like jeans and plaid shirt from his literal laundry line. He's leaning up against the hood of the car, just like cool. Kevin Costner cool, like in the poster pose. And you just get Philip coming out of the backseat of the car in his Casper costume and literally standing right beside him and doing the same like cross-armed, like lean against the like looking up at him, trying to like copy exactly the like movie poster pose that he's doing and all of that. And how they recreate his first time ever trick-or-treating. Because he's like, Philip at first doesn't want to do it because he's just like, it's against my religion. He's like, well, I ain't asking your mother and I ain't asking Jehovah. I'm asking you. Do you want to go trick-or-treating or not? And when they do it, they pull up to this nice country woman's house and she has no candy because it's like days later, or at least a day later. And Costner shows his gun to her and she has to like drop the Wonder Bread and the mustard and the cash from her purse into his like, his trick-or-treat bag. And yeah, he's like teaching the kid, like, what, you make us some mustard sandwiches, out of that, as Eddie was saying. And, like, it's so funny how these humorous details are them trying to force these very sort of family dynamics and make them happen in these very warm and, emotional ways without having the resources to do them and doing them anyway. And I think that's where a lot of the humor comes from.
Mm-hmm. Also, just a note on the humor. Well, firstly, I want to say that Eastwood's humor is consistent through his filmography, and it's what endears you to his characters. It's like a very simple formula, but he hits it so perfectly. But man, that is the worst trick-or-treating haul anyone has ever received outside of the It's a Great Pumpkin Charlie Brown when he just gets a rock.
The cash is pretty nice. The cash is pretty nice for the kid.
The cash is nice, but it's like a can of beans with potatoes, onions, bread,
there's
mustard.
Some onions.
Which I hate that I thought that when he was making mustard sandwiches. I was like, you could throw some onion in there. It might be a little...
Let's get this sandwich going.
Listeners, I want you to know that I did house a mustard sandwich before we started recording this.
Yeah, Eddie was saying that. He got into the zone.
Look, I wanted to eat food that you can't hear me chew on microphone. That's my responsibility as a podcaster.
Is this? I think this is after they, because they passed that family that's kind of doing a picnic on the park, and it's so that he can scout out a roadblock and kind of make a more strategic calculation. But
abusing the image of the family too, which I found really interesting, because he's like, now I get to participate, and these guys go, oh, well, there's 6 people in here, these guys are all a family, gets them through the roadblock and then steals their car. And also, it's one of the first times we see him briefly observe like the mom being a little rough with the kids, and him being like, man, like, and this kind of treatment just exists like everywhere.
And both times that it happens in the movie, one with this family and then one with a family later on, that's almost when he seems to make that flip. Like, you know that he's probably going to take advantage of them in some way because he has to survive and get to the next spot. But it's always once he sees the abuse in the kids, he's like, okay, now I'm going to rob you at gunpoint. Fuck you now. And it's interesting that he kind of, they at least write it that way, that he waits for that moment.
Yeah, you can tell that like those moments of him having powerful feelings are coming, from, and we know his backstory, and we know about his abusive father and all this stuff that start to really come into the play, that the way that he registers that, and then the way that they overlap that and build it with Philip, obviously experiencing so many of these freedoms and this opportunity to make choices for the first time, and being kind of instructed on how to make decisions on what's right and what's wrong, and the some of the things that how Butch is coming to some of the decisions that he makes, even though he has a really hard time explaining the decision to want to just like fuck the roadside bar waitress, and he's just like, I can't believe I have to have this conversation. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, actually, because of the subtlety of a very specific line that I find very moving, despite how obviously funny it is, which is Kevin Costner saying, haven't you ever seen your mom like kiss a man? Mm-hmm. And Philip is just like, who was just peeping. He goes, well, like, no. He's like, that's not normal. And that's when Costner has to go, shit, like, I guess my childhood is a little different than other people's childhood, where I grew up in a brothel that my mother worked in. And that's just one of those moments where they don't underline that, but it's there in that moment in Costner's performance to be like, man, it's weird that I have to explain that I was like sexually attracted to a woman, and because it's fun and it feels good. And then I love that Philip is like, did you love her? He's like, yeah, I love her. I kissed her butt, didn't I? He had to explain eating waitress ass to little Philip. It's so good.
And I really do
love
like
that set too. The Dottie's squat and gobble, like that feels like a restaurant that would be in any Clint Eastwood movie.
It's literally called that too. I didn't even realize that.
Like
squat and
calling
gobble.
it the squat and gobble.
When you're about to
she
hook up with the waitress.
Him. Yeah, she seduces him by deep throating a pickle. Like,
oh yeah, they were doing some squat and some gobbling for sure. Oh yeah. I really do like there's two parts here. I'll just say this one because we were talking about the scene, but I like that he lies to him still. Like he still has this kind of impulse or instinct as a man or as like a wannabe father figure to still kind of instill this idea that it's like sex should involve love in some way, at least from this child perspective when you're learning about sexuality. He's not just like full on just being a convict and having like a certain perspective. You think maybe he'd be more honest or more blunt or anything like that, but he still kind of cushions it a little bit in this kind of loving. He's like,
Philip, you should respect women.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And the other one I do really like is when he steals the car from the family guy, and he's like, it is it's by gunpoint and everything, and he is technically threatening them. But then he tells Philip, he's just like, actually being a family man is the best thing a man can be. That guy right there, that's a good father for just giving up his car and not fighting me violently. So he's always teaching lessons,
Well, that it's the way those lessons get wrapped up in the violent context that they are just inherently in that I think is where so much of the power of the movie comes from, and which really comes to a fold, I think, in the really long extended climax that I did not remember how long this sequence is, but it's like 45 minutes of the movie, maybe, from when they go from the sequence of them sleeping in their car in the field where they meet this sort of black farmhand family. Mm-hmm. Who decides to, as a kind gesture, let them sleep in the house rather than in the car in the field. And they get their really, good first night's sleep there. And the only thing that's really kind of going wrong in the scene is that Butch is very sensitive to the way that the farmhand, who seems like a very nice man before he came into the house, really does get violent with his kid and like kind of slaps his kid upside the head. And, they try to move past that by, Costner at one point putting on a record that he's familiar with of this much older song that he's familiar with from his time in the brothel with his mother, and he dances with the grandma and he dances with the little boy. And it's really where the power of those wordless moments that have been building over the course of the movie, of Philip observing the danger that he's in every time Butch is putting them, and like willing to, maybe, or is at least thinking about, he might have to kill his way out of a certain situation for survival purposes. And it merges with all of, obviously, the violence of Butch observing the families who are abusing these children, and how kind of casually accepting or casually accepted it is, and without realizing the kind of damage and hurt that they're doing to the kids, and like the lifelong damages that he's experienced due to that, which is why it hits him a little bit harder. And those two things just perfectly merge into this moment where he pulls the gun on the dad who hits his own kid. And he starts basically scaring the kid and Philip, and at gunpoint, like, makes the dad like hold his kid and like tell him he loves him, and like ties the family up and duct tapes the grandma's mouth like while she's saying a prayer and all this, and plays the song again, but in this much scarier sort of power dynamic where it almost looks like he's going to like kill this family, like I don't, like in cold blood style, and or Phillip something like that. Like it's noticing.
Like he's very scared.
Yeah, no, like the vibes are like rancid, and how angry and how unhinged he's slowly starting to become throughout the course of the sequence is really starting to overpower. And he really is thinking about executing this father in front of his mother and his child, and in front of Philip. And Philip is so scared and so sad that he literally grabs that gun. He makes the choice to grab it exactly how he was taught by Butch to do. and he shoots him in the gut for what he was clearly angrily thinking about doing to this family, and it basically becomes the exact same thing that Philip was when he was a kid, who had to, a situation got out of hand and it confused him, and he had to shoot a man in order to avoid violence.
And what's scary
that's exactly what Philip has to do.
And what's scary too is the confidence that he'd need to have to do that is only built up by Butch throughout the film. And he even gives him that choice in that moment where he starts to tie the family up, and he's just like, you can watch or you can leave. And like, it just to give the kid that choice, and for him to basically stay, and then not only stay but enact violence to save the family.
He's like, I'm a lot smarter than you think I am, because and not only that, I think maybe my favorite detail is that he shoots him, and obviously it's a really harrowing decision that the kid makes, but also the quick wit of like dumping the gun down the well and like stealing the keys out of the car so that he can't drive away, and being like, I'm done.
He's learned,
like this has been fun. I've learned a lot from him. But like, he literally was just thinking about becoming like a fucking like serial killer of a family.
I love the editing of that sequence too. I mean, the cuts to like the old phonograph playing the record and just all the reaction shots, it really drags it out in a way, like dragging out the suspense to its logical endpoint leading up to him shooting Butch in the chest. And like, I just think it's probably the best edited scene in the movie in terms of like elongating things past their actual reality. Like as Josh said, from this point to the end of the movie, it's like 45 fucking minutes, when in reality it's probably like 15, but the editing elongates it in such a fascinating way that like keeps you on the edge of your seat. It's not like it becomes boring or slow or anything. It's almost like doing slow motion without actually doing slow motion. And it's just such a feat of montage.
You're kind of like locked into every single perspective at a certain point, to the degree where you get the same amount of time with everyone by the end, which is cool, because having the film be edited in a way where you're kind of constantly going back and forth, and then for them to finally come together in this moment is really effective. And I also like this idea that Costner is now chasing Philip. Like he's chasing him down in a sense of like just trying to survive, maybe explain to him what's going on, that he's not going to kill him, whatever it is, but he's bleeding out of his stomach. He's, it almost, it's kind of reminiscent of like The Shining or something, when the dad is going after the family, but he's even talking to himself like, I only killed 2 people my whole life. And you can tell that he's becoming just disoriented and he's losing himself a little bit. Like
although I like that it's kind of the reverse of The Shining in the way, because it's like he was getting violently unhinged, and the shot actually, like the decision that the kid made to shoot him and stop him is the humbling realization of where he was going, and it kind of snaps him out of it, and he goes back into the tender mode of like, Philip, like I wouldn't have done that stuff, like but
now the kid's gone.
I lost
like
control.
He's terrified. So it's just
because the kid has seen that side all of a sudden. That's what makes it so, like, it, despite the conventions that are being used here in terms of the plot, the emotional component of what's being expressed here is actually quite unconventional and quite kind of melancholy in terms of how you might end the finale for like a cross-county manhunt, like chase buddy movie. Like, it really is just like Costner having to apologize to Philip and realizing that he scared him into making the same kind of choice that he did, and has possibly traumatized Philip in the exact same way that happened to him that he didn't want to happen. And like seeing Costner wrestle with all that emotion, while, as you're saying, the movie slowing down to almost match his like his stupor of like bleeding out and like being like near death and like so guilt-ridden about what it is that he did to the kid. But and also, I gotta say, part of the humor of it, a little impressed with the kid. He's just like, that was the right call, you know? I'm proud. I'm proud of the decision that you made.
Throwing the gun down the well is like a genius. Like Costner didn't even ever have to teach him that. That's just something he picked up by osmosis by hanging out with him.
Yeah, and I love the respect too that Butch now has for him. Like I love the line where he's like, "I'm glad it was you as opposed to someone I don't know. All things considered, I feel pretty good." Like it's just this like acceptance of like, I'm glad it was a friend. You know, I'm glad that we had this time together, and I got to teach you some things. You taught me
two
some
people
things.
who understand each other.
Yeah.
He gets a great line in there. He has so many great lines in this, but one of my favorites is, "I believe in ghosts now," because he's wearing the Casper the Friendly Ghost outfit.
Oh God, come on now. That's gut wrenching.
So good.
Right
I mean, there's endless, places you could go with the symbolism of the ghost being the costume there, of course, And I just love that final standoff with those two sitting under the tree. It feels like mythical almost, with that row of cops from the manhunt all at the top of the hill,
the
with
one tree trunk in the middle of just this like vast field. It almost looks
So
like a Western vista or something. It looks so
exactly.
good.
And this whole movie, Costner's been teaching this kid all these lessons and teaching him how to live right and everything like that. And then in one question, the kid has asked him so many questions and gotten so many answers, but with one question, he just breaks the fabric of the entire relationship, asking, "Are you bad?" He just realizes, oh, I've been with a bad guy this whole time. And the thing is that question holds so much ironic weight because all of these lessons that Costner's been teaching him has been about living in the gray area of morality, So, if White Hunter Black Heart is like the Brechtian one, this almost achieves that too, just like taking a step back and making the audience think about these types of movies and what is right and wrong. And are people like Bradley Whitford even bad because he's the one taking the shot through the scope,
Mm-hmm.
And it's so incredible. The first time I watched it, it called to mind one of Eastwood's heroes, to be sure, John Ford, with not just Liberty Valance. I think you could relate to a lot of Eastwood movies, but for me, I was thinking about Young Mr. Lincoln when Henry Fonda, as Abraham Lincoln at one point reads a book that's one of the great props ever. It just says "The Book of the Law," and after he finishes it, he goes, "Well, by jing, that's all there is to it, right and wrong," and it's the clear, Fordian irony there.
We figured it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Finally.
And I feel like I have that same weight of the world of American morality and storytelling coming down on me in that moment between the kid and Butch under the tree as I did watching Young Mr. Lincoln. It really cements its place in film history for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's and there's so many incredible moments in this final, I guess now like 20 minutes or whatever. I love the moment where he is presenting that he's threatening the kid, and he'll either
that's one of the best moments. The way the kid looks at him, like, "What are you saying?" And the way that he goes, "Don't look at me like that. I don't even have a gun. I'm bluffing, kid. Like, fucking, I'm not gonna." Even though he's literally, because it's Eastwood and the rest of the gang shows up to try to negotiate the boy's safety, and he's bluffing that he's playing the part of ruthless criminal who would kill a kid. He's like, "You let me drive to Mexico and drop the kid off at the border, or I will shoot this kid in the fucking head," is basically what he says. And Philip is briefly like, "That's a pretty scary performance, man." And he's like, "I'm literally, that I wouldn't do that. We've just had this spiritual connection with each other. We both know that I would not do that to you." But at the same time, he's just like, it's weird for Philip to have to read between the lines on what's happening in this situation, because there's so much complex morality being, addressed. Like the fact that Eastwood feels so sad about the fact that he's partially kicked this entire altercation into motion 30 years ago by making a decision to put him into, give him a hard time. And the fact that, he's thinking about, does he have a gun? Do we have to shoot him? Or can I go there unarmed and talk him down and all of this? And, you're right that like all of those different things feel like everyone has their own little story and their own little close up that's all, clashing in this finale.
Yeah. It's just like, come on, man, we've been through enough. You can't trust me on this. And then there's just the Philip coming to terms with, like, although he had obviously these issues of repression with the family that he was growing up in, being Jehovah's Witness, and his mom being very devout of that. There is that moment where it's finally like, hey, Butch is looking at him and basically like, can I actually give you over to this adult? Will this adult treat you the way that you deserve to be treated in some way? And for him to just be like, I want to go home.
She's a good mom.
Yeah, my mom is not
so
bad.
cute.
She's a real good mommy.
Yeah.
It's just like that. It's nice to, and it's good for Butch's character because he really doesn't want to let go. He's dying clearly, but he really doesn't want to let go until he knows that this one thing in his life that was kind of good for the last day is going to be safe. You know, this kid is going to be loved.
And then when he does that, he totally goes, you know what, Philip, it's fine. I'm going to die here. You can walk back. Goodbye. It's been a hell of a ride. And the way that he goes, you know, walk that way, put your hands up, take all this with you. And he just screams, make way for the friendliest ghost I know, as, you know, Philip starts walking hands up towards the cop. And, you know, Butch starts kind of stumbling and bleeding and kind of going in the opposite direction. And, you know, and you just, the way that you can see Philip wrestling with the fact that as soon as he goes there, he thinks these people are going to kill him.
Yeah. And he's like, wait a minute.
He's not quote unquote a bad man. There's more complexity than just being a bad guy, even though he is technically, in like legal terms, the bad guy of this particular, you know, context. And the way that just Philip, the close up on him making that decision to just turn around and run back, and the way that obviously Eastwood and the entire crew of sort of law enforcement are so confused. They were like, is this like a Stockholm syndrome thing? Like, what the fuck is going on? Like, does this guy still have a gun? Could he still hurt this kid? And they see that image of just him, that close up of them holding hands and like walking back together hand in hand with Philip, you know, bringing him in to be like, this is a good guy. I sign off. If you're going to listen to me, then, you know, we should treat this guy right, which obviously Eastwood tries to do by showing up to the final standoff unarmed. And, you know, kind of, you know, having Costner straight up admit to him that the entire pistol thing with the pistol was a bluff. And before everyone else, though, from a distance gets that information, yeah, you just get the fucking Bradley Whitford fucking psycho who just, you know, sees him reach into his back pocket to pull out a letter to give to the kid and just executes him on the spot. And it is like a full like squib takedown. And I do Costner, it's a slightly humorous response to be like, damn, boss, shot twice in one day. You know, after admitting that he's literally only killed 2 people in his life, which was a guy in the brothel who was abusing his mom when he was, you know, at 8 years old, and obviously the fucking psycho prisoner who tried to kill the kid. And yeah, him just going down, and Eastwood witnessing the close-up execution, the boy witnessing it, and just, you know, seeing this like sort of doomed cycle that they have both kind of, you know, just been an active participant in. And, you know, there's just such a mood of atonement and kind of confusion hanging over the symbolic death of, you know, Philip's childhood, which is in, you know, that image of the Casper mask next to the corpse of, you know, his new like best friend in an empty field that he doesn't completely understand why any of this happened.
Yeah. I mean, I just loved the string of reaction shots after Bradley Whitford pulls the trigger too. It's another example, much like the scene with the record playing and the black farmhand family, like where the editing kind of elongates it. It's almost discontinuous editing, making the actual moment much longer than it actually is. You get like every single character's reaction to that gunshot being fired. And, you know, the film takes its time to establish all these people, even if it's only like a couple lines, like, you know, Clint, his like right-hand man in the RV with him. You don't learn all that much about him, but when you see his reaction to the shooting, you understand it. Like, it is a real reaction. And I just think it's such a great, like, dramatic climax beyond the, like, hyper melodramatic moment between the kids and, you know, the mom and everything. And also just, like, all of the side characters getting their getting their just desserts, if you will. Like, getting their moment on screen to kind of see how this moment defines them. You know?
Oh yeah, it's brilliant editing that way, and especially I think Dern's reaction is so heart wrenching. Like, she's truly just she's also probably looking at the psychology not just of, you know, the of Butch and trying to understand and empathize, but just watching that murder happen in front of the kid's eyes, she's like, do you know what you just fucking did to that child for just decades now? The trauma that you've instilled in him.
Like that's the exact experience as a child that Butch had that made him partially into who he was. And also for Dern, I think that she's kind of part of like this new book of, I'm going to internally like fix this, and I'm going to start treating these types of people with more humanity and consider the psychological effects of what's happened to them and their histories and all this kind of stuff. And the fact that she's also a firsthand witness to slowly converting Eastwood to that perspective, and both of them just being completely helpless to doing anything about it. Like diagnosing it isn't enough. They literally were not able to prevent it. And I think there's something so really tragic in the reactions that those two characters has. And I think one of the most powerful moments of acting, and because of how well built too in the entire story it is in Eastwood's career, is when he sits down and she goes, you know, you did everything that you could, like you, as a cop, like you listened to me and you thought of him and you went in unarmed and you tried to de-escalate. That's all you can do. And he literally just goes, I don't know nothing. Not one damn thing. And it's like, if that just isn't like an admission of this is unfixable, unless, you know, like it's so heart-wrenching.
Yeah, that is his Unforgiven moment in this movie. You know, like this, that is what puts this in the White Hunter Black Heart Unforgiven conversation, because, you know, you could watch this movie from the perspective of like a Costner star vehicle almost. I mean, for God's sake, there's a nod to Bull Durham. There's a painting for a painted advertisement for Bull Durham tobacco. Of course, Bull Durham being Costner's, you know, maybe his best performance, in my opinion, at least. But man, that last scene with Eastwood is just like, you know, what he's getting at about his own image and about the way he views the world and masculinity and violence in both sides of the law in Unforgiven and so many other films. It's heart-wrenching.
Yeah, and I also love the just that final sequence that mirrors the beginning that I was talking about, with him dying and seeing the perspective. It's like slow motion. He's got the Casper mask beside him, and the money is like,
dude, he gets to go up in the helicopter like the rocket ship that he's so excited to ride earlier.
What I love about it is that, at least the way that I read, the way that he was kind of editing these shots together, when it goes closer to the perspective of Butch, it really does dive into that more dreamlike. He's almost looks content and relaxed, and like he's back in that daydream kind of sequence that they allude to a little bit in the beginning before it turns. And then when they go to the perspective of Philip, and he's looking down from the helicopter at Butch's body, it's just the bloody body, and just he's dead. And it just looks like there's nothing pretty or dreamlike about it. And just for them to go back and forth between those two perspectives is really interesting and heart-wrenching. Because it's both, you know, it's like Butch is letting go, which is kind of beautiful that he doesn't have to just be on the run for the rest of his life constantly. And but
he has a very different feeling about what it is that just happened to him, where he's like cathartically, you know, this is over, and you know, I did my, you know, I tried my best, and I imparted my wisdoms to this child, and meanwhile the child is like, am I as traumatized and destroyed as this guy was when he was 8 years old?
Right.
Like
because that's what Philip's left with. So I think it's very, very, very good. Oh, there was one last thing. I did at first find they almost have like gags when this scene is starting, where the cops show up and like Clint Eastwood's trying to use the megaphone and he can't quite figure it out. And
that's that Clint humor, baby.
They even do that with the mother as well, when she's trying to recite like her love to Philip. And so at first I was kind of like, and at first I was kind of like, that is kind of undermining a little bit of the real seriousness of this scene. But then it just gets, you know, it just gets sadder and sadder and sadder, and then it does a complete 180 to that. So I was like, you know what? I think that I also think it just kind of shows the incompetence of the justice system. That's kind of what it's doing. It's like all these hundreds of cops show up and they can't even figure out how to communicate with a fucking megaphone. So there's definitely something there. But yeah, I also think it just kind of brings some levity to to the scene that you're about to get hammered with when everything really starts to pop off. So I ended up liking
one note on that final shot is that it's almost like a meta moment within Eastwood's filmography, because, you know, if you've seen enough of his movies, you've grown very accustomed to ending on a helicopter shot flying away from the action. Even in some of Siegel's Eastwood movies, you know, like Dirty Harry, I think the last shot is that classic helicopter shot after he throws his gun into the lake or whatever. And then in this one, it's literally the classic Eastwood helicopter away ending, and it's tracking the helicopter showing the boy and his mother getting taken back home. And I just thought that was like a cheeky little thing for the tourists out there, keeping a tally of how many Eastwood movies end with an epic helicopter flyaway shot.
Absolutely.
That's right. How many end with a helicopter shot of a helicopter?
Exactly.
That's why it's the best one in a way. So,
yeah,
if we are pivoting towards reductive rating round, though, yeah, Perfect World is one of my favorite Clint Eastwood movies, so it's got to get the 5 for me. As I said at the top, I do think it's just one of the more sneakily complex and heart-wrenching. I think, again, partially because you do have a very sentimental Americana, John Lee Hancock kind of script going on here. You do definitely have a couple conventional genre movie pleasures of if you're someone who likes a cops and crook manhunt, or you're someone who likes a buddy road movie. There's definitely elements of both of those movies taking place. And Eastwood, as we've known throughout his entire career, is not above satisfying a genre audience. We saw that with Juror Number 2 earlier this year. He had a lot of fun doing the traditional courtroom thriller aspects of that movie, but he always does find a very interesting and idea-driven angle where he gets to throw more of that sort of ambivalence and more of that ambiguity and address more of these elements of the macho genre movie myths and the various complexities that he does want to address. And I think here he really does capture, and I was so shocked the first time I ever watched it, because I was just like, yeah, Kevin Costner, easygoing charm, being a little bit of a psycho sometimes, but in like a cool way, and hanging out with a kid and getting into antics and drinking RC Cola and blasting country music and all this stuff. There's a part of your brain that tickles, and then there's another part of your brain that goes throughout behind every single one of those scenes. If you look for it, there is a small little detail in someone's performance or in a specific line delivery or in the way that this structurally doles out its details, that there is such a large, engrossing tragedy and history that is being addressed in this movie that has to do with fathers failing sons for generations and the cycles of abuse and violence that children experience and inherit, and just the obvious flaws built into the American justice system and the rehabilitation process, and things that once again have been lifelong interests, I think, for Clint Eastwood. And it's just the fact that those things have so subtly brought all of those damaged characters into orbit with one another, and the fact that he's able, I think, through both the rambling episodic patience of what he's doing and the kind of meditative register that some people, I think, registered as slow and boring at the time, just contributes to the power of what it's doing. Like, there's warmth to this as well as the weariness, and there's tenderness as well as the woundedness, and there's even honestly a little bit of period nostalgia, despite all of the sort of melancholy, because, you know, sometimes you do love the beautiful sun-kissed imagery of them just ripping around a small Texas town or kind of like a back road and getting into this outlaw stuff that they're doing. It's just at the same time, all of that is imbued with, I think, this really, really harrowing history of these characters and the performances. And I think Eastwood does just a fantastic job at very simply drawing them and giving the actors opportunity to shade them in and to really experience those things and live in with them. And yeah, I think you really do get a sense of, you know, like, I think the child performance is one of the best I've ever seen. I think Costner, obviously interacting with that performance is absolutely fantastic, and dealing with all these difficult questions of of being a grown-up child, but also trying to protect and teach and pass his own worldview along to this boy, even though his worldview is a little fucked up and the kid is scared of it. And there's just so much complexity in that, and the way that all gets woven in with the procedural element, and Eastwood as, you know, symbolically kind of bearing witness to what it is that some of those old macho Western tendencies, what they've done to someone trying to make sense of the modern world and how they apply there. And in fact, they are applied in a much more upsetting and a much more just tragic fashion, I think. And yeah, so this one, 5 for me.
Nice. Yeah, this is the first time I've seen this, actually. I've been meaning to watch this for a while now. I remember, I think a few years ago, everybody in the Discord was watching it and fiving it, and I was just like, I gotta get around to this thing. It is fantastic. I think right now I'm just going to give it the Jamie 4. I kind of want to just revisit it and feel it out, but I don't know. There's not really anything I can really be particular about what I dislike, so I'm sure it'll get there. I do like that, like Clint Eastwood again. He's just got such a control behind the camera, and it doesn't feel flashy, which I think works really well with the movie. It kind of has this grounded believability to it, mixed with a little bit of a vibe of like an American myth, and because it still does have this like episodic adventure thing that doesn't entirely feel like it would be telling a historical event of someone being kidnapped or anything like that. But there's this still, every interaction just still feels very grounded and real. And the character, Butch's character especially, feels very nuanced. And I just love all of his contradictions, and the fact that, you know, he can jump from like he's standing up for a child that's being abused, but in order to do that he's beating the shit out of the father in front of that child is just like a constant contradiction, or an example of the constant contradictions that his character goes through in the film. And I think it's great. It is what makes this as good as it is. So yeah, the father-son dynamic is fantastic. I agree with you, Josh, that I think the performance from the kid, Philip, what is his name? TJ Lowther, is really good. And I think it probably comes from that Eastwood mentality of directing, where it's like, doesn't he have that kind of, he only does the first 2 takes usually. It's the most naturalistic approach to performing. And it feels like he's definitely directing and doing it with this kid, and it does feel very natural.
Yeah, he just feels like a real kid being put in this situation,
right? And and there's none of those. Even with his line deliveries, when he has the lines like, you know, she's a good mommy, it just feels still like he's not getting the like. Even if there is a close-up, it doesn't feel like what I think, honestly,
it's not Spielberg, the cutesy overacting.
Yeah, and I honestly, and I love Spielberg, but I do think that if he was at the helm of this thing, he would have made that a little bit more sentimental in a way that might be a little bit over the top. Which for him, you know, he'd probably find a way for it to make it work. But I do like that the kid feels just real. It makes for the moments where he is in danger just feel that much more, you know, tense. So, I think this is great. I can't wait to revisit it. And highly recommend.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my very favorite Clint Eastwood movies, and by extension, it's like probably one of the 10 best movies of the 1990s for me, which is one of the most stacked decades of all time. I think that, like, in comparison with White Hunter, Black Heart, it's the more handsomely photographed movie, and I think that often just has to do with it being shot in scope rather than flat 185. Like, you're kind of more forced to think compositionally in that wider ratio, unless you're just churning out like Netflix garbage, like nowadays, like every other commercial is shot in scope with no real mind for composition. But yeah, I feel like Eastwood, when he's shooting in scope, it always like just has more of a refined sense of visual style, even if it's very like sneakily done. You know, he's very sturdy behind the camera, not too many showy shots, but the compositional strength is always there when you're looking for it. Mm-hmm. And I just,
you always know the close-up is going to be expertly chosen whenever he does it. So like that, like those moments in the finale when you get those reaction shots, or you get the kid grabbing his hand and holding hands with him, or you get that close-up of just his bleeding gut or whatever, like he chooses them so well and frames them so well.
Yeah, the shot selection is great. Like, I mean, you go from looking through the scope of Bradley Whitford to the close-ups on everyone. You don't actually get to see Bradley Whitford's face in close-up. He's obscured by the gun. And it's like those little choices that are so perfect for this. And I just think that it's almost like two movies at once. You know, usually the kind of cop criminal divide movies, it's like, you know, you're intercutting more and you're blending them together. You're maybe trying to say something about the thin line between the law and the lawless. This one almost feels like it's two separate movies, but for the better. You know, like this manhunt thing has its own economy with the RV, and of course Costner and the kid, that could be a road movie into itself, but them coming together for that elongated climax is just such perfect filmmaking. And it's one of those things where it's hard for me to get into why it moves me so much on a thematic level, emotional level, and I can almost only talk about like the style and the dramatics of it, but it is like an unthinkably moving movie to me. I think that Eastwood, like, it's because it's, you know, it's someone like Eastwood directing a script that was written for someone like Spielberg in mind. And so people who listen to the show, maybe they don't know me too well. I'm not the biggest Spielberg guy. I especially find his melodramas to be quite cloying, but it's someone with a bit of a remove like Eastwood, a little bit more of a complicated relationship with drama like Eastwood, and a complicated relationship with his own image like Eastwood, that makes stuff like this just work so well for me. And also just the novelty of Laura Dern being in a Clint Eastwood movie is hilarious. I just
which I was going to say we have to thank Spielberg for, because I guess Spielberg got the script and passed it along to her, and she was like, if you won't do it, I'll do it.
Yeah, on set of Jurassic
awesome.
Park. Which I could totally see Laura Dern being on the Jurassic Park set being like, oh, I can make a movie about humans? Yeah, sure. It's like, do I go make a Clint Eastwood movie where I get to go home at 3 p.m. every day because we only do one take? Or do I stick with Spielberg?
And all my scenes are just like going back and forth with Eastwood himself about like the fucking this spiritual philosophical idea on like how it is we treat criminals and stuff like that. Like, I don't know. I don't see how it's such an attractive idea, I think.
Yeah, she must have just been like, all right, Steven, have fun fixing the Holocaust with your next movie. I'm going to go fucking hang out with Clint Eastwood for a couple weeks.
Yeah. But yeah, man, what a fucking movie. Yeah, what
absolutely.
Two great movies. I think that's going to wrap it up for this week's Clint Eastwood 90s very self-implicating, self-reflective double feature of White Hunter, Black Heart, and A Perfect World. Thanks so much, Eddie, for joining us once again, and for bringing these films, and for finally getting us to enter the Eastwood 90s period. I have a feeling we're probably going to have to address Unforgiven soon now.
Yep. Oh, you are absolutely going to have to address that one. It's funny, I suggested Unforgiven and then forgot that I have also already done an episode on Unforgiven on my podcast, but hey,
it doesn't matter. Anyone would want to talk about. Every time I think about it, like they played actually Unforgiven here in Toronto on a print last year, and I went to it again, and I was just like, it's the best movie. It's just the best movie. I have to see that so boring. It's so boring, but I was like, fucking, I don't know. So I'm excited to talk about it whenever we get to it. But before we sign off, though, Eddie, what is going on over in Extended Clip World? What can our listeners go over and expect from you guys soon?
Well, right now, as we are recording this, my podcast, Extended Clip, which has been running for the last 5 years or so, we are doing a mini-series on our Patreon this month about the films of Andrei Tarkovsky. And then on our main feed this month, we are focusing on Hollywood's response to the Cold War, kind of as an A-side, B-side, Soviet Union's greatest filmmaker. Some Eisensteinians nerds might come for me for that. And some tankies might be like, hey, Tarkovsky was a bad communist, but you know what? Who cares? But yeah, so right now we're kind of like flipping between those two every week. And then our February calendar will be dropping very soon, where we got some great stuff coming up, some Jacques Rivette. We got some deep cut Japanese 60s crime films by Hideo Gosha, I believe that's who we're doing one by. And yeah, we just got a lot of really a lot of good stuff over there. Obviously, Josh has been on the show before. Josh and Jamie contributed to our year-end special, and then Josh and Jamie together are going to be coming on, I believe, in February as well. So, you know, it's never too late to hop on board with Extended Clip.
Oh, yeah. And I won't be saying the movie because I don't know 100%, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be bringing some Mountain Dew energy to that show.
Yes.
You won't want to miss it. That's for sure. So,
Jamie told me what movie. We're not 1,000% locked in yet, so I won't spoil it. But I'm going to be dropping the Extended Clip calendar soon for February, and it is the opposite of an Andrei Tarkovsky movie. I'll just say that. If Andrei Tarkovsky movies
that's
are
the energy the Sleazoids boys like to bring to any show that we attend. That's our mode that we operate in. But yeah, we can recommend, please go and check out Extended Clip, and we will be going on there soon. For anyone who is not convinced by that, you will be convinced for sure by that. Yeah. We are going to be back in 1 week's time for our listeners over on the Patreon feed, where, as Jamie alluded to, we are going to be going French crime mode because our good pal Gerard Butler had a little bit of a European heist experience recently, and we decided it was finally time. You guys have been asking for us to talk about these movies for a long time. We're going to be talking about Rafifi and Le Cercle Rouge over the Patreon. We're going to get a little arty ourselves. So we're going to have some fun doing that over on the Patreon. And then in 2 weeks' time, oh man, I actually don't even know if this has been 100% confirmed, but we are going to be once again scraping the bottom of the barrel of what's available to us of the films of David Cronenberg.
Let's go.
And I don't know if it's been exactly locked in what movie it is. We're probably going to have to break the rules to do like one of the early 2000s ones, or maybe there's a late 90s one available to us still too. We will be revealing what that is probably on next week's episode, but that's going to be over on the main feed.
You guys should just say fuck it and do Maps to the Stars. Like, who cares about the rules of the podcast? You could just do Maps to the Stars. That's movie. Like one of the fucking best movies. I just watched that one this past summer. Man, I fucking love Maps to the Stars. That one rules.
Me too.
Bruce Wagner is a god of writing.
Yeah, it's so
I mean, I love Cosmopolis too. So we at some point we're going to make an excuse to talk about that probably too, or we'll bring it over to the clip too. We'll see. But until then, we are signing off. How long has this been? How long have we been going for? Jesus Christ. Okay.
Only 3 hours.
We love Eastwood, baby.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
3 hours is normal.
True.
Yeah, that's fine.
To be honest.
What am I talking about?
You guys just did a 5-hour episode. If I had to guess, you guys only talked about juror number 2 for the whole 5 hours, right? That was true. It was that long? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. There were a lot of complaints actually. They were like, what the fuck? So much juror number 2. But that's fine. We love talking about Eastwood on this show.
Love that. Yeah, you can listen to the best of 2024 extended clip episode for more juror number 2 and our actual just episode we did on juror number 2 as well.
So much juror number 2 content coming your way.
I think we are in competition.
We've cornered the market on the juror number 2 podcast content.
Okay, so there are multiple podcasts that I'm aware of that are just like about Clint Eastwood, and besides those, I think we are in competition for the most Clint Eastwood coverage because you guys have done 9 of his movies already. I was tallying the extended clip catalog. I'm pretty sure we've done a dozen Clint Eastwood episodes, and I had not even included Unforgiven when I was counting those.
Oh damn!
So some slipped to my mind too.
He's a king. I can't wait to talk about him again.
He's a king.
We will be.
Well, we're going to keep coming back to the well. There's so many left to go.
So many. Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. I mean, come on. No one's podcasting about that one. True Crime, where there's a flashback nested within James Woods putting a hot dog in his mouth, which is one of the craziest editing choices of all time.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, is Absolute Power, which is the one where he takes down Bill Clinton.
That's
Yes.
single-handedly.
Oh my God. Yeah.
That's a fun one. Take him down.
So,
Beautiful.
yeah, but yeah, I think
All right,
that
well,
is
thank
going
you
to
guys.
wrap it up.
Yeah,
Thank you guys for
Thanks
having
for
me
coming
on.
on, dude.
Always gotta thank you guys for bringing me on. Always glad to come on to Sleazoids, the number one film podcast not named extended clip as far as I'm concerned.
I'll take that.
That's right,
Hell
baby.
yeah.
It's an honor. But yes, that is, I think, going to wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.
Goodbye, Sleazoids.